Chapter 7:15. Dead. Silence. A frozen dead silence. Even the big shots who were quietly peeping in the side room were stunned, staring at the insolent figure. For the first time in a long time, they saw someone who dared to step on Bei Yuan's face. Only Bei Yuan looked down at the finger in front of his chest in a daze. It was still unbelievable. When he looked up, he saw Huai Shi's mocking and indifferent eyes. His face turned from red to blue, and the cane between his 5 fingers almost cracked. He roared angrily. "Bastard, you dare to insult me. I just said a few words of truth. You don't have to be so angry, right?" Huai Shi sighed. "You don't have to speak so loudly. I can hear you." He paused for a moment, and his eyes became dangerous. He calmly patted the man in front of him on the shoulder, tidied up his collar and hair, and gently told him, "No matter how rude you are, you shouldn't be so rude in front of the coffin of the deceased. Calm down, okay?" Huai Shi patted the holster under his ribs through the dress. He slowly let go of his hand and took a step back. He looked at his appearance and nodded with satisfaction. "That's right. You are the messenger of the 5 big shots. You shouldn't lower yourself to the level of small people like us. You should at least show a dignified appearance. You think you've won." Bei Yuan squeezed out a hoarse voice from between his teeth. His old face was gloomy, and he stared at his face. "You think you are very powerful, very strong. I know that every year there will be people like you who don't know the immensity of heaven and earth jumping out, wanting to challenge authority. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You think you can challenge the 5 big shots with Tengbin's inheritance in your hands. But you are dreaming, Huai Shi. If the 5 big shots don't allow it, you can't even be the boss. Probably. Maybe it's just like what you said." Huai Shi shrugged indifferently and smiled. "But who do you think you are? If you want to take away my position, let the 5 big shots talk to me. Luo He, Sheng Tianmu, Jiuwa, Qinya, and Huang Chuan, it doesn't matter who it is." He bent down and whispered into Bei Yuan's ear, "If they are not satisfied with me, as a newcomer, then ask them to come and tell me personally." In the silence, Bei Yuan raised his eyes and looked at the man's face. Very quickly, he nodded slowly. "Very good. I will pass on your words. Huai Shi, I really hope that you can still have this kind of backbone when you're about to die." He withdrew his venomous gaze and didn't say anything else. He turned around and left, but after taking a few steps, he heard a voice behind him. "Oh, right. Aren't you here to offer your condolences?" Huai Shi, who was in front of the memorial tablet, turned around and asked in confusion, "Why don't you burn incense?" Bei Yuan's footsteps paused. His expression twitched as he restrained his anger. He turned around and raised his hand towards the foot of the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, he bent down and offered a bunch of incense sticks with both hands. The incense sticks were lit in the candlelight. The fleeting flame rose and illuminated the faces of the old and the young. Very quickly, it disappeared in the water vapor that blew in from the thin rain. Only a thread of flickering flame fell into the incense burner and turned into spirals of green smoke, diffusing in all directions. Watching Bei Yuan leave angrily at the foot of the mountain, his face pale, walked over and lowered his voice. "Bei Yuan is the messenger of the 5 big bosses. If I know," Huai Shi said, "I did it on purpose." At the foot of the mountain was sluggish. Why? The reason is very simple. Huai Shi turned around and looked at him calmly. If there is no chance, how can a newcomer stand out? At the foot of the mountain, he wanted to say something, but stopped. He really wanted to say that he was roasting the Fujimoto group on the fire. Once this spread out, he was afraid that they would be in danger of being overturned. But the Fujimoto group no longer existed. Now, it should be the Huai Shi group. The matter of the relationship had already been decided. What right did he, a has-been, have to make irresponsible remarks? What was done could not be undone. What was left was nothing more than a mountain of knives and a sea of fire. After the panic, at the foot of the mountain, he had already accepted the reality. If the 5 big bosses were to blame him, at worst he would accompany the group leader on the road to hell. He lowered his eyes and did not speak anymore. The consequences of offending Bei Yuan did not need to wait until tomorrow. It had already appeared at this moment. The big bosses who had participated in the farewell in the side room had already begun to make various excuses and bid farewell. They admired Yu Huaishi's courage to chase away the messenger of the 5 big bosses. But it did not mean that they liked to associate with a guy who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Oh, Mr. Huaishi is young and promising. I should have stayed to drink a few more cups of wine. Unfortunately, there was an emergency at home, and I could not stay for long. What a pity! The old man of the Yamatagumi pretended to be regretful. He held Huaishi's hand and reluctantly said goodbye. Huaishi did not insist. He did not even ask Fujimoto's widow and child to stay. He just smiled and said goodbye one by one. You are not leaving after dinner? What a pity. He politely sent them out of the door. Have a safe journey, everyone. I will not send you off. After watching the old men turn around, Huaishi looked at the house and asked, seemingly puzzled, how strange. Is everyone actually not interested in the Tiger King Group's inheritance? Under the umbrella, the old man of the Yamatagumi paused in his footsteps. However, he did not look back and left with a normal expression. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the back door. The old man who had left and returned smiled at the foot of the mountain. Oh, I forgot to bring an umbrella. Can you do me a favor and let this old man disturb you for dinner? Of course, please come in. The foot of the mountain gestured and pointed to the side room next to the morning hall. In the side room, which was bustling with activity again, many pairs of eyes looked over and immediately became unhappy. Hey, old turtle, didn't you leave? Why are you back? My nephew and Fujimoto were sworn brothers in prison. Why can't we have a drink at his funeral? But you, bald Kappa, didn't you say that your daughter is about to give birth? Hurry up and go back. I only have 2 sons, and they are both eating in prison. Where did this daughter come from? You must have heard wrongly, old turtle. In less than 10 minutes, more than 1/3 of the people actually ran back. It was like the second and third meetings between the employees of a club. After deceiving the irrelevant and insensible fellows away, they reunited in a familiar place again. Indeed, the Huai paper group did not know what was good for them and might be in danger. However, this did not affect how tempting the Tiger King Group's inheritance was. If they did not take action now and waited for the higher-ups of the alliance to distribute it, who knew how much effort they would have to put in to get their hands on it? How could it compare to the pleasure of taking advantage of the situation now? Even if the Huai paper group was no longer around, they couldn't just ask them to return the assets that they had spent money on, even if they were the 5 big bosses, right? Although the extreme Dao did not follow the so-called procedures and never paid taxes, there were also rules. There was too much room for manipulation and too much profit to be made. These old fogies couldn't help but be tempted. Besides, they might even be able to take another wave of the Huai paper group. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have the assets of 2 groups serving them? Looking at the lively atmosphere in the room from afar, Huaishi turned and left. He threw the rest of the matters to Oshiya. There was no need for him to appear again. An hour later, Oshiya hurried into the lounge specially prepared for Huaishi. He was sweating profusely and wiping his forehead. Team leader, the assets of the Tiger King Group have been sold. The fixed assets and goods in their hands, as well as the channels and shops of the milk tea chain, have all been bought by those four groups. At this point, he couldn't help but feel the pinch. It was still too rushed. Those old fogies had opened their mouths wide and had no room to bargain at all. When they haggled, it was as if they were buying cabbages. Moreover, according to the rules, such assets that had not been dealt with properly had to be discounted by 30%. It was almost the same as daylight robbery. He lowered his head and handed over the thick documents in his hands. He reported, this time it was respectively from the Yamatagumi, and Huaisher waved and interrupted the long-winded speech that followed. Just tell me the total amount. A total of 57 million US dollars. Oshiya adjusted his glasses and took a few breaths to prevent himself from having a heart attack. According to your request, we only want cash and hard currency. If it's not enough, we'll mortgage it first and settle it within a week. After hastily calculating the borrowed income, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. In this case, Huai Paper Group's accounts now have a large sum of money. What do they need so much money for? Huaisher waved his hand indifferently. How much money do we have in the accounts now, including the surplus and working capital from the last quarter? The bulk of it is the advance payment that has just been transferred. There's a total of about 9 million US dollars. That's quite a lot. Huaisher nodded in understanding. He stared at the gradually rising twilight sky outside and said thoughtfully, Oshiya, how many people do you think there are in the entire Danbo inner circle? Oshiya was puzzled. After thinking for a long time, he said hesitantly, about 200,000 people. Anyway, the annual census doesn't count the people here, and no one has counted it before. Then let's make it 250,000. Huaisher lowered his head and stared at the flickering cigarette at his fingertips. He thought for a moment and shrugged. Then, let's do it this way. Before Oshiya could react, he raised his head and smiled. Go tell everyone here that there's a guy called Huai Paper who's new here. He wants to treat them to a drink and ask them to take care of him in the future. He said, I want to treat everyone to a drink. Oshiya was stunned. He froze on the spot and was dumbfounded. Boss, are you serious? Such a large sum of money is not something to joke about, right? Huaisher said, help me do the math. You have a calculator? This was the simplest arithmetic problem. The cheapest beer, Twilight beer, cost 270 Ing dollars per can. That was a total of 67 million Ing dollars, which was almost 700,000 American dollars. In this case, I can still keep more than 8 million. Huaisher pinched his chin and thought for a moment. He took out a business card from his pocket, Border Peace Water Conservancy Group. Contact this company. I've already negotiated the terms of the contract. After that, just discuss the prepayment from next week onwards. Remember to be able to buy water for costs of the pipeline laying, clear, drinkable water. He said, but water is different from wine. Wine is free, but water is 3 times the market price. In the silence, Oshiya's hands trembled as he held the paper. He almost suspected that he had heard wrong, but it was difficult to doubt his words. After a long time, he panted and finally calmed down. Taking off his glasses with trembling hands, the white-haired man bent forward and bowed 90 degrees. Yes, sir. 2 minutes later, the first order from the leader of Huaisher's group reached everyone's ears. It was not a fight, nor was it a reprimand or praise. It was just a simple order. He wanted to treat everyone to a drink. Most people thought that he was crazy. Some people were already quietly preparing to leave and find their next job before the big wave. But more people chose to stay, because there was too little time, because they were still observing, and because the red packet given by their big brother was too tempting. Of course, there were also uneasy members who quietly found Shangya, who was the closest to the bottom, and asked with concern, "Brother Shangya, I heard that the boss offended the 5 big bosses. Is that true? I'm afraid that everyone will have a hard time in the future." "Brother Huaishir is a real man. What do you know?" Shangya, who was wrapped in bandages, smoked a cigarette as if he was looking at a group of idiots. He squinted and said, "Didn't you get the bonus? Do your job well. Not enough cars? Then go and borrow. Doesn't Yamada Society have a freight company? If you don't have enough manpower, then call those useless people in your family who only know how to take drugs over. It's fine as long as they have hands and feet. Don't tell me that the boss doesn't pay." No matter what, tonight, under this absurd order, the new Huaishir group began to operate. He had mobilized more than twice the manpower and countless external helpers. He had spent a lot of money. Then, he had used more than 70% of the budget to empty almost all the convenience stores and warehouses in Kyoto. He had called all the suppliers and even drove the trucks to Nara and Osaka. At 10 o'clock in the evening, it seemed that all the beer in the world had come to the inner circle of Danbois. Then, under the confused gazes of the onlookers, the members of Huaishir group moved box after box to the side of the street, piling up into mountains at hundreds of intersections. When the bell rang in the distance, men with tattoos and ill-fitting suits jumped out of the car. They opened the packages neatly and politely greeted the people around them. They delivered every can of beer to anyone who passed by. Free. Just like that, they tirelessly told everyone that this was not a promotional advertisement, nor was it any despicable scam. It was just that a Mr. Huaishir wanted to treat you to a drink. You didn't need to know who Huaishir was, nor did you need to understand what he was doing here. Whether you chose to accept or refuse, he just wanted to make you happy. Even if it was only for a moment, even if the happiness was only a little. It was that simple. He just wanted you to live well. Some people refused and quickly walked away, watching vigilantly. However, there were even more people who chose to accept the heavy beer because they didn't care about it. Then, after carefully observing the production date and label, they pulled the tab and tasted it. Some people praised it, while others just casually took a few sips and threw it into the dustbin. Whether it was curiosity, suspicion, or resistance, more and more people gathered. The atmosphere gradually heated up, and the cheers spread in all directions. In the end, in this narrow and dirty inner circle of Danbois, it gathered into a thin and rippling sea. After many years, some people could still recall the cheers and laughter on the street that night. Everyone raised the beer in their hands and drank heartily. The people hiding in the alleys, under the bridges, and in the corners came to the street again and took a can of beer from those people without distinction. Whether it was hooligans, gangsters, ordinary people, mixed-race people, helpers, or dancers, under the illumination of the neon lights, everyone had a hallucinatory smile on their faces. The distant sound of a harmonica came in the wind, and everything was drowned in the sweet smell of wheat. It seemed that the world was no longer hazy. Chapter 7:16. When the hustle and bustle ended, the rain had stopped. The streets returned to silence in the middle of the night. Only the scattered cans on the ground proved the existence of the cocktail party just now. The smell of alcohol in the air gradually dissipated in the damp wind. Only the people in Huayi's group were still finishing up. They distributed the remaining beer and drank heartily. The rain has stopped. Huaishir sighed softly. He turned around and looked at Shangya, who walked in. Did it go well? How can it not go well when it's free of charge? Shangya held the beer can in his hand. He didn't care about the bandages on his body. He raised his head and gulped down the beer. He wiped his mouth in satisfaction. I've really learned something. I haven't seen the people here so happy in so many years. It's like a carnival. Huaishir asked, "Do they look happy?" Shangye was stunned for a long time. He nodded subconsciously. "Of course, they are happy, right?" Huaishir chuckled softly. In the silence, he picked up the beer in his hand and raised his glass to the man in the morning hall. He toasted from afar. "Cheers." The first step had been taken. "Leave the rest to me." In the quiet courtyard of Ingzhou, the sound of water gurgling could be heard. Jinglu's bamboo tube was filled with water. It hit the stone and echoed in a low voice. Under the moonlight, the bamboo leaves danced. The old man standing in front of the pond sprinkled fish food. The koi fish in the pond surged and competed for the food. The scene of bright red and white was really pleasing to the eye. The agile Shiba Inu lay by the pond and stretched out its claws curiously. Instead, it was splashed by the swaying fishtail. Just like that, the old man quietly listened to the report behind him. "It sounds like an unruly mad dog." After a long time, Kosuke nodded slowly. He sprinkled the last of the fish food in his hand and lowered his head to rub the ears of the Shiba Inu. He said worriedly, "Our Tai Lang can't be like that." The Shiba Inu, named Tai Lang, looked up blankly. He grinned and wagged his tail at the old man. "Okay, go play in the yard. Don't bully the fish anymore." The old man rubbed the Shiba Inu's face and drove it away from the fish pond. As he watched it run away, his expression gradually became serious. Huai actually dares to offend the dignity of the alliance. This is truly unforgivable. He turned around and looked indifferently at the man kneeling on the ground behind him. "But there is one thing that he was right about, Lord Beiyuan. This is indeed your fault, isn't it?" Beiyuan was on the ground, shivering. "It was because of your delay and carelessness that the Tiger King group was destroyed," Sheng Tianmu said. "Actually, I can't be bothered to care about the life and death of the two guys from the Yuban family. They violated the law and were contaminated with forbidden drugs. Even without the Huaimai group, someone would use other excuses to get rid of them sooner or later. But there is no doubt about one thing. Beiyuan Kuan, because of you, the prestige of the five elders has been damaged. That's the biggest mistake you've ever made." This one, Beiyuan's face was pale as he swallowed his saliva. He wanted to explain, but under the gaze of the heavens, he could not say anything. Eventually, he closed his eyes in despair. "This one is willing to accept punishment. Whether you are willing or not, punishment will come. Because you have violated the rules, Beiyuan Kuan, even I will not be lenient." The old man lowered his head and looked at his subordinate on the ground. He looked at the missing little finger on his right hand and suddenly said, 8 fingers shouldn't affect your retirement life, right?" Beiyuan was stunned and in disbelief. But soon after, he kowtowed frantically on the ground. Thank you for your magnanimity. This one will definitely." He expressed his gratitude with tears of gratitude and was already incoherent. "All right, you may leave." Sheng Tianmu retracted his gaze and casually waved his hand. In the empty courtyard, a respectful attendant walked over from afar with a tray and presented the things that had just been delivered to the old man. A can of beer, the cheapest Twilight on the market, seemed to have just been removed from its plastic packaging. There were scratches on it, and even the packaging was not considered excellent. "Even this old man has a jar?" Sheng Tianmu was stunned, and then laughed softly. "That's great. I didn't expect to have beer to drink tonight." He casually picked up the can and opened it. He was not afraid of the poison inside. After taking a big gulp, he smacked his lips. "You can't even bear to give me an ice cube. The taste is just SOSO." He paused and looked into the distance. In the shadow of the bamboo forest, he raised his voice and asked, "Hey, guest, do you want to join us?" Under the shadow of the bamboo forest, A sloppy middle-aged man walked out. His messy blonde hair was casually thrown behind his head. It was a little curly. He wore an ill-fitting windbreaker and had a stubble on his beard. He looked like a tramp that could be seen everywhere in America, but in his hand was a can of beer of the same style. He waved it at Sheng Tianmu. "I have it. Young people these days are really generous." Sheng Tianmu laughed softly and took another sip. He raised his hand and poured the beer into the pond. He said to the fish that were fighting for food, "Since everyone has a share, you all should have some too. Have a taste of the pride and courage of young people." A can of beer quickly disappeared without a trace in the fish's mouths. Only the empty can was thrown back onto the plate and left silently with the attendant. Under the moonlight, Sheng Tianmu waved his hand and asked casually, "Lawrence, can you tell me what Green Sun thinks about this matter?" Lawrence replied in a deep voice, "Fujimoto is one of our members." Sheng Tianmu corrected, "Once. There's no difference. One day as Green Sun, forever as Green Sunday." Lawrence said, "What Kaishiki did was just blood for blood. We can't let him understand when revenge breeds revenge, then put down the knife in front of the enemy and happily play golf together, right?" The tramp representing Green Sun said, "This is not against the rules." "Wrong." Sheng Tianmu shook his head and looked back at the tramp. He told him word by word, "That's not right, Mr. Lawrence. The rules are set by us. Of course, they should serve us." The old man of the five said, "Although I don't have any opinion, the kid from the Huangchuan family is hopping mad. Moreover, this kind of thing that shakes the authority of the five can't be left alone. It must be dealt with quickly and severely." Lawrence shrugged indifferently and drank his beer. He asked casually, "If that's the case, then why did you drink his beer?" "It's because I drank that we can talk now." Sheng Tianmu snorted. "Young people these days have become so powerful that it's scary. They don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. It's enviable and scary. How is this a mad dog? It's clearly a wild wolf that wants to mark its territory and announce it to the world. However, courage alone is not enough. Are there not enough people with courage?" Sheng Tianmu looked back and shrugged sympathetically. "But so many years have passed. The five of them are still the five of them. However, the Huai-Chi group might not last until tomorrow. I hope that the five of them can handle this matter properly." Lawrence said, "Green Sun thinks highly of him. To be exact, the Grand Commander thinks highly of him." This time, Sheng Tianmu was silent. He was stunned, as if he had heard something unbelievable. Even someone as arrogant as the Grand Commander knows how to take care of the younger generation. Yes, because he's worth it. In the silence, Sheng Tianmu rubbed his forehead and sighed as he waved his hand. "All right, then he still has a choice. Is he to be punished by the five of them, or cut off one of his hands to apologize to the Alliance? Do you think that kind of arrogant young man will agree?" Lawrence asked, "Then why do you think I care?" Sheng Tianmu asked coldly. "He insulted the Northern Plains, insulted the envoy of the Alliance. He offended me. Lawrence, if not for this glass of wine, why would I even look at him? I've been waiting here for you for so long. For the sake of Green Sun, I can pretend that nothing happened and help you convince Huang Chuan not to pursue the matter. However, the Alliance will not recognize the Huai-Chi group. If Huai-Chi does not understand the value of the Alliance, then the Anesthetic Pursuit Alliance will no longer be his friends." Sheng Tianmu said, "At that time, no one will need to do anything. The Six Directions Society and the K Society will eat them up until there's nothing left." Lawrence was unmoved. He just lowered his head and drank his beer quietly. After so many years of dealing with him, how could he not know what kind of style this old ghost was? Rather than calling him an extreme, it was better to call him a businessman. He was so calculating that it was frightening. He would not do any business that would cause him to lose money. After saying so much, you still haven't gotten to the point. Lawrence finished his beer and looked up to ask, "What about the but at the end? Tell me the but." Under his gaze, Shang Tianmu suddenly laughed softly and spread out his hands. "That's right. Just like what you said, there are always buts. Not everyone has the qualifications to possess it. He must prove that he is worthy." As he spoke, he took out an envelope and threw it over. Lawrence raised his hand, and the envelope landed in front of him. It floated in the air and opened by itself, revealing 2 pieces of information and a dignified middle-aged man's photo. He wore a white robe and held a bright staff in his hand. He looked indescribably holy. Lawrence narrowed his eyes and recognized the face. The Illumination Society. "Yes," Shang Tianmu said. "Recently, there have been abnormal changes in the upper echelons of the Illumination Society. After the change of the officiant, their style suddenly became radical, and they began to secretly infiltrate the inner circle of Danbo. It is said that many idiots have become their believers. Even the madam of the Chiba family has been dragged into it. The struggle between the second branch and the first branch is really ugly. When the altar was discovered in the room, Chiba's face turned green." "Ha ha ha ha." Shang Tianmu laughed gloatingly, happy to see his ally in trouble. However, Lawrence didn't laugh along with him. He just waited quietly for him to finish. "Although it's fun to watch a joke, the Alliance must take an equal revenge," Shang Tianmu said casually. "Since you think so highly of Huai Qi, ask him to use his instinct as an extreme Dao and add some trouble for the other party. Of course, he will bear the consequences. The Alliance will never admit it." After he finished speaking, he smiled. "If he can save Chiba's face and prove his strength and importance, not only will the Alliance not pursue the matter, he might even owe you a favor." Lawrence put away the envelope. He didn't refuse, but he couldn't be bothered to give him any face. "It should be a favor owed to you, right?" "I don't deny it." Shang Tianmu spread his hands. In the night wind that was gradually turning cold, he suddenly said, "Have you heard? It is said that the higher-ups are going to issue a peace order." Lawrence was silent for a moment and slowly nodded. The situation was overwhelmingly unfavorable for the Alliance today. The so-called peace order was one of the traditions passed down from the famous imperial edict in the history of Yingzhou. In fact, there were only 4 words in total. The world was at peace, but in fact, it had nothing to do with peace. It was to let the people on the ground use their weapons. During the 7-day period of the order, all disputes and contradictions that couldn't be put on the table could be solved secretly. As long as it didn't affect the stability of the society, no matter how many people died, no matter how bad the damage was, the authorities wouldn't pursue the matter. It's just like issuing a business license for a dogfighting ring, right? It involves the consumption tax policy of the entire country, and it actually depends on the victory and defeat of a group of Yakuza. Even if I'm this old, sometimes I feel that the world is too ridiculous and ridiculous. But no matter what, we have no choice. Shang Tianmu counted on his fingers and said, "It is said that the K Gang and the Foolish Company have been very close recently. There should be a big move. But the 6 He Gang and the Great Circle have started to shrink. I'm afraid they don't plan to get involved. As for the Iron King Gang, that group of lackeys has been eyeing the inner circle of Danbo for too long. The higher-ups have all placed heavy bets, but no one cares about us, Lawrence." Shang Tianmu said decisively, "Once the joint war in the capital starts, I'm afraid we will be the first to bear the brunt, and be besieged. At this time, the alliance is still scattered. The five big bosses are doing their own things, and there are even people preparing for a riot. No matter how you think about it, there won't be any bright future. Time is limited. We have to gather everyone again. Of course, it would be best if it could be under my leadership. Sheng Tianmu patted his empty hands and sighed softly. The so-called favor is just an excuse. I want to find a chance to have a good talk with the Chiba family. If the alliance can be gathered because of this, I am willing to acknowledge the contribution of the Huai Chi group. Speaking of this, the old man grinned and revealed a smile. If he is not satisfied with this, not to mention anything else, as long as he can establish enough merit, this old man can even marry that ugly girl in the family to him. Lawrence was stunned and raised his eyes. Li was back. At this juncture? Yes, she won't listen to anything. Sheng Tianmu revealed a trace of a self-satisfied smile. Don't look at her young age. She is a brave girl who is not inferior to her mother. You want to see her later? No need. There are too many things to do. Lawrence withdrew his gaze and took out his felt hat from his bosom. He looked at Sheng Tianmu one last time. Also, don't think that I don't know how much of what I said just now was just to scare you. You old ghost, even at this time, you are still thirsting for more power. Sheng Tianmu asked in return. Is this not good, my friend? No, this cannot be better. Lawrence turned and disappeared into the darkness. In the silence, Sheng Tianmu quietly stared at the compound in front of him. After a long time, he turned and left. In the middle of the night, Huaisher woke up from his dream and opened his eyes. He saw the figure who had appeared at some point in time in the corner of his new bedroom. He slowly propped himself up and looked over. Who is it? Lawrence, the person you contacted on the phone. The homeless man who was smoking took off his hat and sighed softly. If you ask me, your recent matters have been a little big and a little troublesome. Are you talking about the Tiger King team? Lawrence shook his head. I'm talking about the water supply company. It will only incur the disgust of the officials. Huaisher was amused. Is there a need to care about those people who are unhappy just because those lowly bastards have clean water to drink? Lawrence didn't answer. He just put the envelope on the table in front of him. The five big bosses have made their decision. Is it to cut off their hands or be expelled? Huaisher asked. Lawrence looked at him unexpectedly and shook his head. The Huaisher group needs to complete a mission to avoid punishment. Do dirty work? It sounds more troublesome than cutting off their hands. Huaisher looked at the information and photos in the opened envelope. Kill them? Or what? You can do whatever you want, but the alliance won't bear any consequences for you. To put it simply, if you do this, you will offend the Illumination Church. At that time, hundreds of thousands of believers in Yingzhou will try to make you a thorn in their side. The Illumination Church, a new religion that spread throughout Southeast Asia. It was expanding like a fish in water in countries like Yingzhou and Xinluo, where religion was legal. There was no lack of people in high positions among the believers. Unlike something like extreme Tao that couldn't be seen in the light, its power and status in the capital were shocking on the surface, not to mention the many people who had been promoted internally. If they didn't handle it well, the Huaisher group would be crushed to pieces. That's it? Huaisher smiled confidently and put away the envelope. I got it. Leave it to me. Lawrence was also stunned. Don't you need help? If there's a need, I'll mention it. Huaisher smiled and watched Lawrence disappear into the darkness. After a long time, he looked around. After confirming that there was no one around, his face fell. After thinking for a while and analyzing carefully, he felt that if he didn't handle this well, not to mention developing and strengthening, he was afraid that he would die on the spot. Right now, there was only one way left. He closed his eyes, put his hands together, and prayed sincerely. Ella, a dream, save me. On the other end of the communication, AI Ching, who had stayed up late and worked overtime to clean up someone's mess, didn't sleep for more than 30 hours. She picked up a cup of water expressionlessly and drank the stomach medicine. Then she coldly rolled her eyes. There's no hope. Just wait for death. Goodbye. Chapter 717. Hello. Are you asleep? Why don't we have a chat? Are you studying? You're so focused. That's amazing. You must teach me in the next exam. Have you eaten dinner? Let's eat together next time, okay? Are you there? Can you reply when you see it? I have something to say to you. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean that. I just want to have a good talk with you. Why aren't you talking? Huaishe raised his hand, and 100,000 licking messages began to flood the screen. That was why he could type quickly. The astronomy club's function was really good. He wanted to install one for himself later. Except for the fact that the other side didn't reply to his messages, there was nothing wrong with the plugin. After harassing for a long time, AI Ching still didn't reply. After 100,000 messages without a reply, Huaishe had a strange feeling of emptiness in his heart. There was hope in the disappointment and sadness in the waiting. No way. You're really ignoring me? What do you want me to say? AI Ching's unhappy voice finally sounded. You caused this trouble. Please deal with it yourself, okay? It's already not easy for me to help you deal with that mess. Do you expect me to help you reach the peak of life on the road of extreme Tao? No, I can deal with that. Huaishe scratched his head, awkwardly. But I'm afraid it'll be a little too extreme. AI Ching frowned and was instantly alert. What do you want to do? It depends on what to do. Huaishe pondered for a moment and said embarrassedly, if it's a small punishment, we'll rush in when they gather the believers to pray. We'll crucify that guy in front of everyone and make him repent. But if that guy wants to commit a crime and deserves to die, then we'll just let his believers eat Holy Communion. Huaishe had two plans in his mind. He felt that no matter which one it was, it would cause a lot of trouble. He felt that if he didn't handle it well, he would be on the wanted list of the whole country. He had to ask for permission first, or at least find the astronomy club to take the blame. Silence, a long silence. After a long time, he heard AI Ching's sigh. Huaishe, have you realized that your interest in breaking the law is a little too high? She asked sternly, is it because you've tasted the sweetness of being a scapegoat in Exine High, and that's why you can't stop yourself on this path? What do you mean by double-crossing? I don't know. Huaishe retorted in a trembling voice. Aren't I wholeheartedly committed to peace in the present realm? Aren't I already representing the Astronomical Association to infiltrate the green sun? Can't you make things easier for me? What convenience do you want? Huaishe thought for a while and asked tentatively, lead strumming? Huaishe, you've already offended the Looming Hall. Don't be blacklisted by the Ingzhou branch of the Central Bureau, okay? Huaishe's eyes widened when he heard that. Wow, it's all about blowing up cultists. You had so much fun back then, and now I can't do it? What's wrong with this world? We're tools. He had just started a set of combination punches when he was coldly interrupted by AI Ching. Huaishe, if you want to seriously discuss this issue, I can accompany you. But please don't make things difficult for a woman with a bad temper recently, okay? Listen carefully. If you want me to help you control the scope of this situation, then do your best to kill him quietly. It's okay if you don't kill him, but it's better not to crucify him. And you can't launch a terrorist attack in the territory of Ingzhou and blow a well-known local religious figure into ashes with a missile. I understand. Huaisher nodded in realization. He hammered his fist into his palm and concluded, then let's just live cut. Okay, I'm wrong. I'll abide by the law. I'll think of another way, okay? Before he finished speaking, he felt a sense of crisis from his heart, as if someone was aiming a sniper rifle at him with a finger on the trigger. Huaisher quickly changed his words and admitted his mistake. He never mentioned it again. Instant cowardice. Everyone gave him face and acted as if nothing had happened. You're undercover, not in a war. The help that the Astronomy Society can provide you in the dark is limited if you don't want everyone to know that you're an undercover of the Astronomy Society. AI Ching suddenly asked, and do you still remember why you're undercover? Of course. It's to ascend. Cough, cough. What's the Divine City again? Huaisher thought for a long time and finally remembered the name. The future of the Divine City. Anyway, it's good that you remember. We're already behind the progress of the other groups. AI Ching rubbed her eyebrows and sighed tiredly. If you can enter the upper echelons of the Hybrid Alliance, perhaps it'll be easier to get information. I'll report this to the upper echelons. Hopefully, there'll be more support. After a pause, she asked, Name? Why, sure. I'm not asking you. What's the one from the Illumination Church called? Well, let me see. Samboa Longma. Found it. Through the Astronomy Society's database, AI Ching had the authority to access the information of the Ingzhou branch. The Archbishop of the Illumination Church's capital district, male, 47 years old. She glanced at the information on the screen and said meaningfully, It's not easy. In 5 years, you've actually worked your way up from a bankrupt real estate agent to this position. You're even known as the projection of the ninth dimension's Holy Spirit. From this, it seems that if some people don't do good things, they might start to have a meteoric rise on the path of breaking the law. Wait a minute, were you insulting me again? And what Holy Spirit projection of the ninth dimension? Huaisher felt that there were 100,000 question marks rising from his head. He couldn't believe it. Did we unknowingly add a new setting? That's not right. He lowered his head and secretly glanced at the Book of Destiny. There was no such thing in the records. It's normal. Anyone who sees this thing will think that there's something wrong with it. AI Ching said, Just think of it as the reincarnation of a great god in a fairy tale made up by the Illumination Church. Other than the holy wife selected from the believers, there are 6 mistresses and 11 illegitimate children. Well, 4 of them are his biological children. The ratio isn't low. It seems that there's a market for middle-aged female believers. He often enlightens and injects spirituality into some female believers. It's said that 8 out of 10 times, he can let people see the universe's holy church and the scene of the gods smiling. Really? What do you think? AI Ching sneered. As long as you take enough drugs, you can see anything you want. Man-made miracles have always been cheap. They can even be sold wholesale. When do you think is a good time to make a move? There's no time today. Tomorrow won't work either. He's going to play golf with the people from the Looming Hall. If you don't want to be killed by the Ingzhou officials, then don't move. All right, on the 2nd he'll listen to scriptures, stay in a hotel at night, and on the 3rd he'll go to a restaurant. What about on the 4th? Huaisher asked, Is he free the day after tomorrow? I'll pay him a visit. The day after tomorrow won't work either. He'll be at the Illumination Church's largest branch in the capital to participate in a conference hosted by the Pope himself. Isn't that great? Huaisher was overjoyed. Hey, don't mess around. AI Ching paused for a moment and said seriously, the Pope of the Illumination Church is a 4th-level sublimator. Moreover, the situation has been very tense recently. Their higher-ups are all protected by sublimators. You better be careful. Don't worry. Although the astronomy church can't help, I can think of other ways. Huaisher lowered his head and looked at Lawrence's number on his phone. He smiled. Moreover, don't we already have a new friend? In this world, was there anything that could improve friendship more than committing crimes together? There wasn't. He picked up his phone and dialed the number. His tone was gentle. Hello, are you there? 2 days later, in the courtyard of the Tenmu family, in the narrow and cramped tea house, a dignified old man and an absent-minded middle-aged man knelt on the long table. Under the blazing sun outside the window, a lazy Shiba Inu lay lazily in the shadow of the rockery, panting with its tongue out. The lush greenery embellished the withered mountains and rivers, making one's heart calm. Along with the sound of boiling tea coming from the teapot, matcha was stirred by cha xian and dyed with a touch of green that made one's heart calm. At the head of the table, the famous tea master in the capital respectfully held up the teacup in his hand and offered it with both hands. In the silence, the two people held up the teacup and tasted the bitter taste. After praising the tea master bowed, kept his tools, and turned to leave. In the quiet tea house, only the two people were left sitting opposite each other. The tea has been drunk, and the play has been performed. Old man, if you don't mind, I'll take my leave first. You're leaving? Sheng Tianmu picked up his folding fan and knocked on his head. He asked in confusion, Did I not treat you well? Qian Yi Longer sighed impatiently. The taste of the tea is all right, but the barking of the dogs is too annoying. Can you be quieter next time? Looks like you've been under a lot of pressure recently. Ha ha ha. No matter how heroic you are, you can't escape from a woman's tears. Speaking of which, you're almost 50 years old, right? It's time for you to settle down. A good man is someone who knows how to take care of his family. Qian Yi Longer looked up and glanced at him. Did you invite me to tea just to laugh at me? No. The 5 big bosses are of the same breath and branch. They're bound together for good or ill. How can I be so bored? Qian Yi Longer's mind spun, and he immediately understood. I heard that Li Hua is back. Are you preparing for her marriage? Sheng Tianmu was instantly alert. What are you thinking about? Your child eats, drinks, gambles, and drinks like you when you were young. How can I discuss this with you? This old man still wants my cute little daughter to accompany me for a few more years. Neither this nor that. Old man, don't tell me you're holding something to bargain with me? Qian Yi Longer narrowed his eyes. Let me think. Is it that panacea that's been in the limelight recently? Or is it the general nothing order? Could it be the Illumination Church? TSK, you'll only be serious when you're talking about your own matters. When can you change your selfish personality? Sheng Tianmu knocked on his fan. It's about the Illumination Church. This old man is trying his best to help you get back at them. You definitely don't have good intentions. Don't think that I'll buy it. Qian Yi Longer was indifferent. You don't have to care about my family matters. Don't worry, it's not me. You don't have to take responsibility. If you're not satisfied, you don't have to appreciate it. Sheng Tianmu knocked on his palm with his fan and looked behind the curtain of the tea room. There was a television that didn't match this place. Look, the show is about to start. Along with his words, the screen slowly lit up, revealing a handsome face with 2 curved horns on his forehead. Facing the 2 audience members in front of the screen, the corners of his mouth curled up, and he smiled evilly, filled with a ghostly demonic nature. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, he made a squeaking sound. Hello, can you see it? This thing isn't broken, right? It's activated just like that. It's high-tech. That face moved closer and looked at the camera. He opened his mouth and exhaled. Then he used his sleeve to wipe it twice. It was shiny, and he sighed, as expected of an alliance. You've mastered the core technology. Hey, stop playing. That's DJI bought from Taichin Heavy Industries. Seeing Huaishur start to swing the drone around and breathe nonstop, Lawrence, who was smoking at the side, couldn't stand it anymore. He pointed at the winding mountain road below the mountain. They're almost here. Chapter 718. Following Lawrence's guidance, a luxurious fleet of vehicles drove out of the tunnel and headed toward the capital at lightning speed. That's fast. Are they in a hurry to go to the toilet? Huaishur lowered his head and looked at them as they left. He picked up the walkie-talkie in his hand and said, "The target has appeared. Everyone get ready. Let's go." As he spoke, he threw the drone into the air and turned to look at the foot of the mountain behind him. He said, "I'll leave the command to you." "Yes." The foot of the mountain bowed respectfully and presented the helmet with both hands. "I wish you prosperity in martial arts. I only hope that your fortune will be more prosperous." His so-called soul, Huaishur stretched out his hand, from the shackles of his helmet and floated on his face. Following the gentle contraction, helmet rose above the shackles of the mortal world. Curved horns were once again entered the hard illusory and gorgeous together with the ferocious golden paint around it. What a wonderful, compassionate love. It looked like a demon bound under the gentle gazes of the gods. In the roar of the engine, the sacred scriptures over and over again, experiencing the feeling of his spirit and sped out in the camera. And sublimated under the light from the drone's kingdom of heaven. The drone that was suspended in the air had changed his body, gradually became limp, disappeared into the air. He lost his strength. Only a faint buzzing sound spread in the sky, and leaned on the leather sky above the dilated empty eyes stared in the middle of the void in front of him. In a limousine, and he could not help but smile irritably. The sound of the heavenly music. He did not look solemn in front of the believers at all. Close. As soon as he entered the car, boom! He took off his shoes and noise suddenly broke out, robe and woke him up from his flowery shirt and gold chain. He looked up in shock. The way heavenly music that lingered in his made him disappear like without a trace. An old monk and was torn apart by the violent noise. Is it necessary to do this? Roar. The situation has been tense recently. Of steel. There's going to be a big loud sound of an engine. Moreover, engine oil, a while ago, didn't those bastards spread the news the heavy that they motorcycles suddenly the cold guard who checked the gun looked up and crossing the limits of the road in order to prevent those bastards from doing anything. It's best to be careful. Actually, to be safe, motorcycle you should wear a bulletproof through the bushes vest, like a drop of ink wearing a bulletproof down from a vest to meet paper. The big masters wherever it passed. Above. It left behind the smoke of the engines, oil or survival maniacs, which did not dissipate for a long time. Mifune Ryoma only the high-pitched and looked at the guards ear-piercing sound of the engine. If anything was rapidly approaching, what's the use of wearing a bullet on the iron horse? Do you want some? It descended from the sky. He deftly rolled a cigarette in his hand and handed it over. The guard in the car picked up the walkie-talkie. There's no need and said vigilantly, "Also, everyone, aren't you going to attend the spiritual assembly if it dares today? To approach, it's precisely because I'm going to preach." Before he finished speaking, gunshots rang out. Ryoma Mifune from the car at the back. He lit a cigarette suddenly and took a deep breath. The guard with the weapon forbidden poked his head out. His back pulled the trigger and his face flushed, galloping behind. His eyes became confused, twisted the and his pupils dilated. In an instant, the speed and ethereal voices and huge motorcycle was unbelievably heavenly music. In an instant, and millions of people were singing a sacred song, nimbly avoiding the spray of the shotgun. In an instant, it was close at hand. He looked down. The red helmet reflected the light of the dashboard, like the twisted face of an evil spirit which seemed to be mocking and grinning. From the speeding motorcycle, the evil spirit raised his elbow and smashed it at the stunned face. Then there was the crisp sound of a watermelon being smashed. The entire interior of the car was dyed a gloomy color under the scarlet splashes. As for the shotgun that had left his hand, it rolled in the air outside the window and fell into the hand that had been raised. He clenched it tightly. The motorcycle galloped and sped up. Boom. Just in front of the mountain ridge, there was a loud roar. Suddenly, the collapsed mountain rocks rolled down and flattened the leading car, blocking the traffic. Then, from the bushes on both sides, the members of the Y Paper group, who had been waiting for a long time, walked out under the leadership of Bueno. They held the long and short guns that Ingzhou did not want civilians to play with and pulled the trigger at the convoy. The exchange of fire began. The scouting car in front was smashed by a huge rock, and the speed of the entire convoy suddenly slowed down. However, the motorcycle riders did not slow down at all and moved forward at lightning speed. They nimbly dodged the weapons behind the windows and adjusted their direction and speed leisurely. They adjusted the accelerator, tilted the car, and nimbly shuttled between the convoy. The shotgun in their hands was held upside down. Like a baseball bat, they swung it at the heads of everyone who dared to show their heads. In the limousine in the middle, Ryoma Sanbu, who was immersed in a trance of forbidden drugs, struggled to prop up his body. His neck twitched as he looked around in a daze. The heavenly music and divine language that lingered in his ears were rapidly fading away. There were constant noises and loud noises squeezing in, causing him to scream irritably. He had yet to react to what was happening. He only heard the roar of the engine gradually approaching, echoing in the surroundings as if it was everywhere. In the illusion, there was a raging fire just outside the car. The entire world seemed to have turned into a gloomy hell. The burning rider rode a steel-like skeletal horse and galloped over with a sharp cry, trampling on flesh and bones. He strolled in the dead wilderness. However, that illusion quickly dissipated under the stimulation of fear. He finally woke up and heard the low roar that lingered outside the car window. It came from the accelerator. Twist twice, loosen it. Twist it twice, loosen it again. The low roar of the engine also became like a strange rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Thump, thump, thump. Thump, thump, thump. What is that? He straightened his neck with difficulty. He did not have time to wipe off the saliva at the corner of his mouth. He stuck his head out to look and saw the insolent figure through the flames outside the window. Thump, thump, thump. Thump, thump, thump. Thump, thump, thump. The low roar was like a hammer hitting his skull, trying to engrave that crazy rhythm into his mind. The burning rider excitedly raised his shotgun and held it upside down, singing happily to the red-stained stock. Buddy, you're just a kid who only knows how to shout loudly. You play on the streets, hoping to become a big shot one day. Boom! Amidst the loud noise, the motorcycle suddenly drifted. The heavy rear of the motorcycle smashed deeply into a door that had just been opened, smashing the person behind it into pieces. The rider raised his head and raised the weapon that looked like a microphone. He lamented regretfully, "You're covered in dust and dirt. You're in such a sorry state. You're kicking iron cans everywhere." At that moment, he raised his head. Behind the red mask, a pair of cold eyes looked over. Through the car window, he pointed at his face. "Singing! Sing loudly!" Therefore, amidst the loud noise, the ethereal heavenly music in his ears was drowned out by the auditory hallucination that sounded like the roar of thousands of people. In the hallucination of the forbidden drug, there were only countless evil spirits crawling out of hell, crouching in his ears and roaring hoarsely, we will rock you." The stereo on the motorcycle let out a deafening sound of a guitar. The horrifying and rebellious melody spread in his brain. Ryoma Mitsufyun's pupils contracted, and he couldn't breathe. The car window shattered. In an instant, the guard in the car flew out. In midair, his body rapidly expanded. After breaking his suit, he spread out 4 ferocious wings. His deformed face quickly turned into a woman's resentful and gloomy face. Rolling darkness spread out, and 4 wings with sharp edges spun in the wind. As he pounced, they formed a huge wheel of blades, sweeping towards the attacker. Flying Fate Demon. On the top of the mountain in the distance, Lawrence, who was smoking, raised his hand and was about to make a move. But before he could help, he saw Weischer's body suddenly leap from the motorcycle. He dodged the knife wheel's slash by a hair's breadth. But under the burning body of the motorcycle, a bent and ferocious figure suddenly flew up. The body jumped nimbly in the air and pounced on Weischer in midair. Bang! In midair, Weischer, who was falling to the ground, raised his head. The mask reflected the ferocious face of the ascendant. Then, the other party also saw the mocking smile under the mask. In his hand, the shotgun was suddenly raised and aimed at the ferocious face. The trigger was pulled. Iron rain burst out. Flames flashed, and both parties flew backward at the same time. Weischer landed on the ground and rolled nimbly. When he got up again, he saw the motorcycle torn to pieces by the knife wheel and the broken sound system. He suddenly felt helpless. In the past, he would have used the axe of wrath to chop off the wings and used the spear of compassion to take the other party's head. Without even landing, he would have used the sword of virtue to behead the ascendant. But because his martial arts were too representative, he couldn't use them at all. He looked at the ascendant, who was screaming in pain in the distance, crawling up from the ground. He sighed and shook his head. "Have you heard of sumo wrestling?" He raised his hand and assumed a professional posture. He curled his finger at the Flying Fate Demon in front of him. As his body faintly swelled, blazing blood surged. The combination of the drummer and Yu's steps. The wrestling was about to begin. Shui, who had been ignored, roared angrily and rushed over from the side. He saw Weischer casually raise her shotgun and pull the trigger again. In the rain of iron, Ascendant flew backward again, letting out a furious roar. "You don't know, stinky brother." Weischer sneered. How could sumo wrestling be so inconvenient? This was Shotgun Pusher, Chapter 719. After another shotgun push that combined cutting-edge technology and the essence of war, the heavily injured Hui fell to the ground, unable to get up again. But just as Huaisher was about to pull the trigger again, he found that there were no more bullets in the gun chamber. There was an awkward click. Then, Flying Fate Demon let out a mournful shriek, and in the darkness, he raised his visor and smiled several different images, pouncing towards behind the car door like a venomous venom. He picked up the thermos bottle instinctively wanted to open the bone burial sanctuary. Cough, cough. But after he reacted, his movements paused for a moment. Mifune, and he had already lost the opportunity to dodge. Your health is not good recently. She's afraid that you'll tire yourself out by sharp wings converged and cultivating believers every day. And the meat grinder opened its bowl of chicken impatiently hugging him into its embrace. Me to send it over on the mountaintop. Lawrence reached out, raised and in the midst of Ryoma Mifune's screams, and aimed at Flying Fate Demon's head from afar, tilted the thermos bottle, the surging origin and got substance. Closer bit by bit. A wisp of frost drink it while lingered above the flame. The scalding soup that had just been taken out of the pot instantly poured into their lungs. The disaster causing Sambu Dragon Horse was entrusted to Lawrence's fingertips, an intense and a terrifying power that was enough to annihilate any sublimator below the fourth step descended. But immediately, ready to go, the heat in the fragrant chicken soup spread and exploded in an instant, swing the shotgun evolving that had long since run out of strange and wonderful illusions at flying far better than any forbidden drug. Smash! Engulfing with a loud bang, a beautiful dream and the bent gun barrel flew in the air, instant, and blood swallowed his consciousness. The violent power completely exploded after the bowl of chicken soup was poured into the gun barrel without leaving a single drop through the gap between the knife's eyes. Had already rolled all of it onto the stunned face, and he was unconscious. The darkness came out of nowhere. Outside the brain could not function in the turbulence, appeared out of nowhere, falling into a short period and put out the cigarette in his hand. Rigidity. He found all it hard to understand that were separated. So, why did you ask me to come here? Then Huaisher threw away the weapon in his hand. Finish it all by yourself. Had half a gun barrel. Why did you drag me along? Aimed at the face to catch a jellyfish and punched with all his might. Look at what you're saying now. We're under the state of exceeding the limit. Of course, this we have to help each other. In the drum hand, already had the answer seriously. Of old six success. It's not good to be alone. The heavenly all drum day. Shook. Let's participate in outdoor activities in the loud sound to improve Flying our friendship. Demon flew out. Why don't we unable to maintain his transformed state? Lawrence just wanted to roll his eyes, sublimate, and fell to the ground. No longer making a sound. If just not, this, I'm leaving. As the curtain gradually fell, it's not good to leave just like Huaisher that. Glanced at Huaisher subconsciously on the ground one last time, trying to find something that could make Lawrence she raised her leg and kicked Cheesehead. When he saw the unconscious knocking Ryoma Mifune, in the end, and his bare he turned around under his flowery shirt and walked towards the wreckage of the motorcycle. After rummaging through it, you know how to draw. Thermos that was covered in looked dust. Over in confusion. He heaved a sigh after a long time. He patted the dust and oil off. Then fortunately, it was not damaged. Huaisher fumbled in his pocket stew that for a long time, took out a marker pen, just like and that, handed it over. He reached out, and pulled open the last card Ryoma Mifune on the ground. Look, aren't you going to avenge the big boss of the Chiba family? Of course. I'll have to rely on you for such a difficult task. Lawrence lowered his head and looked at Ryoma Mifune's bare upper body. He couldn't help but frown. However, when he looked at the marker pen in Huaisher's hand, his hands couldn't help but itch. What a good material. Originally, he didn't want to bother with this kind of trivial matter at all, but the days when he had just debuted and sprayed anti-astronomy slogans everywhere in London were too wonderful. A painter's heart began to itch to give it a try, especially when Huaisher was smiling so sincerely and looking forward to it. It wouldn't be good to disappoint a newcomer. So be it. What's there to be afraid of? I'll give it a try. Since I'm already here, with this thought in mind, Lawrence, who was chatting like a teenager, took the marker pen and scrutinized Ryoma Mifune's body. Tentatively, he drew one stroke, then another stroke, then another stroke. By the time he reacted, a crooked thing had already been drawn. At first glance, it still looked decent. After so many years, his strength hadn't regressed. Lawrence immediately felt relieved. How's this? Not bad. Unfortunately, it lacks some color and charm. Huaisher took the pen and bent down to fill in the blank space at the side. Look, this, and this. Isn't it much better? Lawrence's eyes lit up. You can add a little here, too. If that's the case, after a long time, the fainted flying fate demon on the ground let out a hoarse groan and was about to wake up. The two people who were immersed in their artistic creation finally finished their work perfectly. They lowered their heads and scrutinized the artistic creation that they had jointly completed. The two looked at each other and nodded in satisfaction. They couldn't help but high-five. Great. The drone in the sky quietly overlooked the entire process. It watched as the people from Huaisher Group left without looking back. After a long time, Flying Fate Demon woke up. It woke up Ryoma Mifune and the chi on the ground and fled in fear. That's it. That's it. In front of the screen, Qian Yilong Air clicked his tongue unhappily and looked up. Old man, are you trying to fool me like this? If you ask me, this bunch of trash from Huaisher Group isn't useful at all. They don't even dare to kill people. What's the point of extreme Dao? Don't worry. Sheng Tianmu patted his fan and comforted him. It's not over yet, is it? Huaisher Group promised me that they would avenge our alliance. We should have some trust in young people, right? Before he could finish speaking, the drone's image suddenly turned black. The old man was stunned. Before he could feel awkward, the image lit up again. This time, it was switched to the Illumination Church's messenger office. It was already half an hour later when Ryoma Mifune and the others fled to the messenger office in the capital. Before the panting Ryoma Mifune could speak, the messenger from the Pope reminded him coldly, Priest Ryoma Mifune, you're late. The Dharma assembly has already begun. Because of you, the Holy Lady has already spoken for half an hour. Something happened on the way. I was attacked. Ryoma Mifune explained in a panic. Before he could finish, he was interrupted by the messenger. Since you're still intact, it means that there's no big problem. The Holy Lady's order is for you to quickly go on stage. The messenger reminded him coldly, you should know how important this Dharma assembly is to us. This is the third time the Holy Lady has urged you. She's angry, very angry. In the silence, Ryoma Mifune swallowed his saliva and nodded frantically. Give me 3 more minutes, just 3 more minutes. He had to clean himself up. Otherwise, with Eve's dirty appearance, he might be called a beggar if he walked up to her, let alone preach and speak. He hurriedly changed his clothes in the washroom. After washing his face and hands, he returned to being the solemn light emissary. Regardless of his character or what he had done in the past, being able to climb to the position of a priest as an ordinary person was enough to prove Ryoma Mifune's talent. No matter what happened, once he entered the state, his mood quickly calmed down, and he was far from panic and uneasiness. He even threw his hatred for the group of attackers to the back of his mind. He took the exquisite and solemn scepter from his assistant. He once again transformed into the projection of the Holy Spirit in the mortal world. Just as he walked into the backstage, he heard the gentle and compassionate female voice from the front desk. As the saying goes, revenge breeds revenge. When you pick up the knife, the original sin has already eroded your heart. Only forgiveness and an equal heart can lead us through discrimination and prejudice, humans' original sin and karma. On the podium, the Holy Lady, who was wearing a plain robe and had a compassionate expression, raised her hands and called out to the believers and audience below the podium. Put down the knife and hatred, good believers. Join hands with our former enemies, board the boat of love, and cross the sea of bitterness of this mortal world. No matter how cruel the world is, it will become as bright and vast as a golf course. Below the stage, the fanatics' eyes were already brimming with tears. If this was not a solemn place of worship, perhaps they would have already danced and cheered. The teachings of the Holy Lady were so wonderful. The joy of hearing the truth was indescribable. Under the holy light, everyone showed a smile of yearning for happiness. Infected by this atmosphere, in the VIP seats, the guests who were invited couldn't help but show a look of approval. They were enlightened. As the Holy Lady's speech ended, the warm applause almost overturned the entire roof. Everyone wandered around in this paradise under the light. When the applause finally dissipated, the Holy Lady on the podium spoke at the critical moment when the enthusiasm dropped. She reached out and pointed to the backstage. "Next, Priest Mifune, please come and talk with me about the wonderful changes in the soul and consciousness when you cultivate to the realm of light." Thus, in the holy and solemn chanting, Mifune stepped out and waved to the believers, showing a kind smile. That solemn face was dignified without being angry. This holy aura, without speaking, could let people experience selfless love. It successfully set the atmosphere of the venue to a new height. Today, I'm here to bring some insignificant experience to everyone. This is a wonderful experience that a small believer felt when he was enlightened. I hope it can be of help to everyone. Mifune Ryoma smiled and walked to the podium. He took a deep breath and was ready to talk about the beautiful scenery that he saw when he traveled through many dimensions during his cultivation. Suddenly, he was in a trance, and his opened lips suddenly stopped. His face turned red. When he saw the polite, smiling faces below the podium, he was stunned on the spot. The scene in front of him seemed to be different from before. "It's all fake." A voice said in his ear, "They're all lying to you." Lying to me? Mifune was puzzled and fell into a daze. "Yes, they're all lying to you." The voice said, "This group of fake believers pretending to be touched and understanding, but it's just acting. It's all acting. They just want to use the faith of the sect to achieve their own goals. Don't you know? In order to earn more money and get higher power, this group of people is willing to do anything." Anger. At this moment, Mifune felt it. It was burning anger. Just thinking of this, Mifune, who was able to be indifferent in the past, was furious. He couldn't bear it anymore. At this moment, his soul seemed to be soaring in anger and once again returned to the sacred ninth dimension. He merged with the great Holy Spirit, holding the law and truth in his hand, and turned into a ray of light. Therefore, he could easily sense that the fools in this world were so filthy. This group of fake believers was so presumptuous. Such a filthy existence dared to steal a precious position in the holy place of light and tarnish their faith. It was simply a great shame. He had never had such a clear feeling during cultivation before. The anger of the Holy Spirit was pouring into his soul unceasingly. For the sake of illuminating the paradise, go, Mifune! The gods of the Universal Saint Church gave blessings and orders in his ears. Use the power of light on them. At that moment, Mifune Ryoma couldn't help but widen his eyes. His kind face turned ashen, and he was already full of ferocity. He clenched his fists. "Come." On the podium, the monk who received the divine will suddenly slammed the table, opened his mouth, and roared. The rolling echoes to catch the reverberated in the ears of the believers for a long instantly time, causing everyone to fall into a daze, turning into thunder and puzzlement, and breaking the silence. It was hard to react. Only the saintess on the side quickly turned around and quietly glared over, glaring angrily. "Bastard, what are you talking about?" Then everything went black. Bang! Before she could give a signal with her eyes, she saw Mifune raise his luxurious and exquisite staff and smash it on the merciful face. "How dare you, demon? I can tell at a glance that you're not human. Hurry up and reveal your true form." Mifune Ryoma roared angrily and raised his blood-stained staff. He raised his hand, and along with the words of the Holy Spirit, he fervently chanted the holy incantation from illuminating the paradise. Almighty Sky Dragon, Supreme Ksitigarbha, Prajna Buddhas, Prajna Bamako. He raised the staff in his hand and aimed it at the demon who was pretending to be the saintess and kept smashing it down. Ignoring her tragic screams and wails, Mifune roared angrily and smashed the staff again. Insignificant skill. How dare you show off your slight skill in front of an expert? Almighty Sky Dragon, Almighty Sky Dragon. With a loud bang, the staff was actually broken by the angry Mifune. Under the eyes of everyone, in front of all the VIPs, Mifune Ryoma threw away the broken staff and rode on the saintess with his upper body naked. He raised his iron fist that was burning with the flames of light and sent down divine punishment. Speak. Are you a demon? Speak. In a rage, he tore his robe and revealed the solemn painting of paradise on his back, just around the black dragon that was distorted to the point that it couldn't be seen at all. Auspicious clouds that looked like squid tentacles floated. In the corner, a pink hairdryer was like the finishing touch, giving it perfect vitality. And at the very top, a green sun rose high above the shriveled spine, radiating dark green streaks of light. The light of the green sun shone on the earth. Awesome! Among the panicked believers, Huai sure pressed the shutter of the camera. Just like that, gazing at his perfect work from afar, he turned back and gave a thumbs up to the stunned believer beside him, sincerely praising, as expected of an eminent monk. Subduing demons and demons is really amazing. Ouch. My teeth were knocked out. Ouch. Thunderous methods. Bodhisattva's heart. Too amazing. Look, that demon is repenting. She's crying. She's crying. Amidst the terrified screams of the believers, the saintess lay on the ground. She had already fainted, and her empty eyes reflected the gorgeous dome. Under the purification of the fist of holy light, tears finally flowed out. Chapter 7:20. Under the witness of the relatives of the higher-ups of the Ministry of Health, Agriculture, Forestry, and Land, the Illumination Church had been preparing for a long time, and the curtains were drawn perfectly to this ingenious plot of a holy monk subduing a demon. After knocking out the holy maiden, Ryuma Mitsufuna actually started laughing maniacally. Holy maiden, I want you to help me cultivate. Fortunately, before he planned to kill all of the infernal ghost emissaries, demon venerables, and other such false believers, the Ascendants had finally made their move in secret, putting an end to this farce. When the Holy Lord, who was having a secret meeting with a certain important person in the conference room, learned of this matter, it was already 10 minutes later, just when this video had exceeded 1,000 views on YouTube. In just a short hour, before the Illumination Church activated their connections to delete the video, this video called Sky Dragon Venerable Subduing a Demon Online had already received hundreds of thousands of likes and reposts and close to 1 million views. As for the number of downloads, it was unknown how many. Otherwise, why would they say that Fujimoto Ikiai was the top standard in the industry? The quality of the staff was top-notch, and the equipment was complete. The filming and editing speed was very fast, and the angles were extremely tricky. In particular, the short fighting scenes were actually edited with a soul-stirring feeling. Every drop of tear seemed to bring a heavy echo in the heart. It vividly displayed the holy monk's iron fist and the repentance of a demon. At the end of the video, under the instructions of Thousand Leaves Ruji, the logo of the Anesthetic Hunting Alliance was added. As one of the 5 big shots, he represented the alliance and endorsed the Huai Kaigi group, resolving all their worries. Small matters like the Tiger King group were not worth mentioning at all. After Thousand Leaves Ruji, who had laughed until his abdominal muscles cramped, wiped his tears with his sleeve, the first thing he did was to grab Sheng Tengmu's hand, wanting to bring the Huai Kaigi group to his side. Old man, you can do whatever you want. You don't care anyway, right? Don't think of asking for a sky-high price. That's the new blood of the alliance that I value, the future mainstay. How can I just give it to someone else? Sheng Tianmu's eyes widened as he said in disbelief, "Aren't you treating this old man too coldly? Come on, you narrow-minded old thing. He humiliated your envoy in front of everyone. If it were you in the past, I'm afraid you would have already packed them up and sold them to the Iron King faction and those Russians." Qian Yilong snorted. He raised his eyes and said seriously, "A talent like him won't have a chance to shine in the hands of an old man like you who likes to follow the rules. Why don't you give him a chance?" "Hey, Long, this old man has watched you grow up. You keep calling me an old man. Aren't you being a little too disrespectful to this old man? It's precisely because I grew up hearing about you that I find it hard to respect you from the bottom of my heart." Qian Yilong raised his eyebrows and looked at him. "Besides, you look like you're waiting for a good price. What exactly are you planning?" "To be honest, this old man only wanted to use this opportunity to ask you to vote for me in the election 2 days later. I don't care if you want other things, but Long, I can't do that. Only the Huaiji group is not allowed." The old man scratched his head with a fan and said, "I don't know why, but Li Hua has been very interested in that handsome face recently. That's right, this old man is already at this age. Of course, this old man isn't the kind of person who will break up a couple. But for the sake of the long-term cooperation between our two families, it's best that this kind of unnecessary friction doesn't appear in the beginning." "Hey, are you serious? Li Hua, that child?" Qian Yilong was in disbelief. "You aren't that shameless to lie to this extent, right? Anyway, you don't have to worry about the matters of the young people. I've already arranged it on my side." Sheng Tianmu waved his hand and said, "Compared to this, I hope that other than messing around with women, you can pay more attention to the matters outside, okay? You're a mixed blood, after all. Don't think that you can stay out of this, right? That depends on what you want to talk about. There are too many annoying things recently." Qian Yilong rubbed his forehead in annoyance. "This is different from my family's affairs and my reputation. Don't think that I can give up much for this. Qian Yi society is also in a terrible fix, right? Is there still no progress on the matter of the elixir?" Qian Yi shrugged. "We've caught thousands of fake drug dealers. The number of fingers we cut off is enough to open a biscuit factory. In the end, we still haven't found any clues." "How embarrassing." "Probably a few months ago, when Miyamoto Genichiro privately asked the 5 big shots for help, the news about the elixir secretly spread in the inner circle of Danbua, a medicine that could cure mixed blood. Many people said it with certainty, but most of them were just rumors. Not many people had seen it. There were even dozens of different versions of the shape and color. There were pills, injections, powders, and even implants. The effects were also different. It could cure AIDS, cure colds, and cure the complications of mixed blood. In reality, thanks to the activity of the fake drug dealers, such rumors were heard every year and every month. Even mixed blood themselves knew that they were incurable. However, it was different this time because the 5 big shots informants found that the elixir was really effective. A mixed blood who was in the late stages of various complications was lying on the street. Someone threw him a pill and said that he would recover after taking it. In the end, he really recovered after taking it. He was alive and kicking, and he was so strong that he could kill a cow. Then he mysteriously disappeared. A huge person mysteriously evaporated in the inner circle of Danbua. Although many people evaporated in the inner circle of Danbua every year, there were not many people who evaporated on their own without the 5 big shots' approval. Now that a storm was about to come, every upper echelon of the alliance could feel immense pressure. Everyone had already expected this. Once the order was issued, what kind of bloody storm would be ushered in? This time, Please let this old man take charge, Lord Thousand Leaves. In the tea room, Shang Tianmu put down his fan, placed his hands on the ground, and bowed to this junior, who was less than half his age. He respectfully asked, "Other than this old man, no one else is more suitable." Shang Tianmu, Sang Jia. In the silence, Qian Yilong sighed helplessly. "Do you crave power to this extent?" "Yes, that's right." The old man slowly raised his head and propped himself up. His wrinkled face was so calm. "Because other than me, no one else can do it. If this old man doesn't stand up, won't he be finished?" He said such self-righteous words without shame, but his eyes were shining with a blazing light. "Leave it to me." He said so. The next day, the messengers of the 5 big shots who came to visit again respectfully congratulated Huai Shi and expressed their appreciation for the young man on behalf of the 5 big shots. After acknowledging the existence and ability of the Huai Shi group, they left an invitation to the alliance meeting the next day and left. At the same time, Lawrence also came. He handed 2 photos to Huai Shi. "What are these?" Huai Shi restrained the impulse of the corner of his eyes from twitching wildly and looked at the photos in his hand. "What are these 2 people doing?" "You don't need to know, but it involves the safety and interests of the entire Ingzhou, no, the entire hybrid race in the present realm. Once you find traces of these 2 people, you need to report it immediately. If it is verified to be true, Green Sun will not be stingy with any rewards. Lawrence put out the cigarette and said concisely, "No matter what happens, Huai Shi, this is something you must do as a member of Green Sunday. I don't need to emphasize the importance of this, do I?" "I think I understand." Huai Shi tried to suppress his abnormality and only showed curiosity and doubt that had nothing to do with him. He raised the photo in his left hand and asked, "Who is this?" Lawrence took out the cigarette box irritably, lit another cigarette, and told him the future of the Divine City, a lunatic. "What about this one?" Huai Shi raised the photo in his right hand and pointed to the man with a flirtatious smile. "Who is this?" "The cowherd who offended the 5 big bosses." In the silence, Lawrence's expression suddenly became complicated. "This is a dangerous character. Huai Shi, the more you know, the more disadvantageous it will be for you. These things have nothing to do with you. Telling you is just a precaution. Compared to those, this is today's highlight." He placed the heavy box in front of Huai Shi. "This is the original Tiger King Group's share. We fought for it and gave it to you. Have a good rest. I will introduce you to a few trustworthy people at tomorrow's banquet." After leaving a box of alchemy precious metals that could pass through all borders, Lawrence turned and left in a hurry. In the silence, Huai Shi raised his palm and swept it over the box. After confirming that there were no listening devices, he ordered the house to put it in the safe and returned to his bedroom in Huai Shi Commercial Company. Finally, he lowered his head and looked at the photo in his hand. He narrowed his eyes and looked carefully, trying to find any differences between the photo and the person in his memory. But in the end, he found that the guy in the photo looked exactly the same as that idiot Yu Dongri. Damn it, why? He could only take the risk of activating his cell phone and try to call him, but it didn't go through for a long time. This guy's WeChat moments had stopped updating half a month ago. He called, but the phone didn't pick up. He sent WeChat messages, but the WeChat messages didn't reply. In the silence, he lowered his head and looked at the 2 photos side by side on the table, feeling the 100,000 little question marks in the minds of 100,000 children. In the silence, Huai Shi closed his eyes and asked softly, "AI Qing, did you see everything?" "Yes." The woman on the other end, who seemed to be online all the time, replied, "I saw everything." "Are you hiding something from me?" Are you talking about the fact that Yu Dongri is a child raised by Green Sun's great commander, the agreement signed between Green Sun and the Directorate of Military Affairs, and his whereabouts after he escaped the surveillance of the Astronomical Association? AI Ching answered calmly and straightforwardly, "Yes." Chapter 7:21. He did not expect AI Ching to be so honest. For a moment, Huaishir was stunned where he was. He really came to Yingzhou? Maybe. AI Ching said, "This has nothing to do with what you and I are going to do. Huaishir, sometimes the fewer people who know about a secret, the better. What I told you just now is still within the scope of the mission, but if you do not want to be thrown into the trench prison, you will need a higher level of authorization." Wait a minute. Huaishir finally reacted. His eyes widened. "OL, Lu is the son of Green Sun's big boss. Adopted son. For the umpteenth time, AI Ching sighed because of his carelessness. Green Sun's leader has no lover or offspring, but he has raised many orphans. They call each other father and son. Although they are not related by blood, they have a deep bond. I thought you knew. How would I know about this kind of big news?" Huaishir was stunned. Isn't this a little too strange? The world's #1 terrorist raising a male prostitute. This is too F*** ridiculous. Then why did you give that guy the hair growth serum at the station? Okay, habitual death, I get it now. Before Huaishir could answer, AI Ching had already guessed the whole story. She rubbed her forehead in frustration. "By the way, according to the surveillance from the central office, your bottle of hair growth serum ended up in Yu Dongri's hands. This is probably the only good news so far. At least he has an endless supply of hair growth serum." Okay, I get it now. In reality, Huaishir did not get it at all. If anything, he was even more curious. Why did he come to the astronomy meeting? Why did he come to Xen Hai? It's a confidential matter. Why sure? AI Ching answered coldly. Just think of it as him coming to Xian High for retirement and checking the depth of MO due. Then what about Felbaha Mansion? Of course, it's because he was the first one to die, and then he died, and that led to his death. Huaishir felt his vision go dark. Every syllable that AI Ching uttered would quickly dissipate in the air, reorganizing into strange noises that were hard to understand. In the end, when they reached his brain, they brought him waves of stabbing pain. AI Ching spoke calmly for 5 minutes, as if she had finished reading a report from beginning to end. It wasn't until Huaishir's vision turned dark and his ears started to hurt that he stopped talking and asked curiously, "How do you feel?" Huaishir paused for a long time before he finally raised his hand to wipe off the saliva at the corner of his mouth. He felt dizzy. This is encrypted. This is the result without the permission of the building. It also gave me a big demerit. AI Ching picked up the phone, glanced at the red alert on it, and tossed it to the side. "So let's stop here, Huaishir. For a tool, you know too much." "Fine." Huaishir sighed and rubbed his numb face. He was worried. "Oh, well, Lu, he won't do something illegal, right? Even when he sells his face as a prostitute, he is so law-abiding and has never dared to skip work. Do you think he has the guts to do that? In any case, since, just think of it as an extra mission. The sooner we find him, the better. His ex-girlfriend is going crazy trying to find him." Huaishir wanted to say something, but stopped. There was a question that he did not know if he should ask, until AI Ching sighed, helplessly. "I know what you want to ask. The answer is that the Astronomical Society will not do anything to him. At most, they will break his legs and send him back to the hospital to recuperate. At the same time, they will add more than 3 layers of security. Other than that, he will not lose a single hair, and his pension will not be deducted. His value is higher than you think, even higher than you and me. To some extent, he is one of the insurance bolts that can allow the Astronomical Society and Green Sun to settle down and not start a large-scale war. Is it that outrageous? Otherwise, AI Ching shook her head, helplessly. Do you have any other questions? Huaisher shrugged. Before hanging up, he still felt a little uneasy. Although it was impolite, he still asked, "Other than that, you are not hiding anything from me, right?" "Of course not." AI Ching's tone became cold. "I think we have to learn to trust each other, don't we? Unfortunately, after so long, there seems to be no progress. Sorry, it's my fault. My fault." Huaisher raised his hands in surrender. "Have a good rest tonight. Tomorrow's banquet is not so simple. At this juncture, the 5 big bosses are meeting. I don't know what they are planning." AI Ching finally reminded him. "The venue is likely to be equipped with a shielding device. If you want to get further clues, you may have to rely on your own efforts." She paused and said goodbye before hanging up. "I wish you all the best." "I hope so." Huaisher sighed, lay on the bed, closed his eyes, and began to toss and turn. On the other side, in the temporary headquarters hidden on the outer edge of Domwa's inner circle, AI Ching calmly processed the reports in her hands, archived the information sent by her subordinates, and sent it further back. In the end, her gaze finally moved away from the screen and looked at the action file that would be sent to the decision-making room tomorrow for backup filing. In silence, she pulled out a file bag at the top of the file and looked at the assassination order for the secret operations team that she had personally signed. In the end, she threw it into the shredder. There was a soft sound of breaking. Before it was archived, the name of the deceased silently disappeared in the ashes, and no one knew. I say, it's not good to do this kind of a legal thing in front of me, right? In the corner, the security guard and thug, Tony the Horseface, who was so quiet that he had no sense of existence, raised his hand and asked, "Besides, this is considered to be hiding something from Huaisher, right? You're not going to tell him, really?" In the silence, AI Ching did not speak. She just turned her head and looked at him quietly. After a long time, she showed a soft smile. "It's okay. I trust you, Mr. Tony," she said. "As long as you don't tell anyone, isn't there no problem?" Tony raised his hands decisively and surrendered. Then he wrapped a few rounds of tape around his mouth under the horseface mask and stopped talking. "It seems that we have reached a consensus. That's good." AI Ching nodded slightly, retracted her gaze, and looked at the clues and information on the screen. "Let's speed up before Green Sun finds you, Dongri." In the long silence, there was only a crisp click. The number on the counter changed again. 4. The next day, in the afternoon, on the streets of Dombwa Inner Circle, Huaisher leaned on a chair downstairs in Fujimoto Commercial, lazily basking in the sun. "Mr. Huaisher." "Good afternoon, Mr. Huaisher." "Hello, Mr. Huaisher. Would you like some fruit? My humble shop has a new dish recently. Are you interested in trying it, Mr. Huaisher?" The pedestrians passing by, those who knew him would greet him, and those who were braver would talk to him. Some people saw the undisguised mixed-race features on his forehead and took a detour from afar, as if they had encountered something dirty. It was useful for the newcomer to treat everyone to beer. At least many people knew that this young mixed-race man slumped in a chair with nothing to do was the recently famous group leader of Huaisher, the most handsome boy in the entire Dombwa Inner Circle. At least there were more people on the street who took care of him. "You're wearing this to the banquet of the 5 bosses?" Lawrence came out of nowhere and looked down at him. He had casually bought a suit, shirt, and tie from a ready-made clothing store this morning. Even the leather shoes were a gift from the boss. Even a young man looking for a job shouldn't look like this. Isn't this already very serious? Huaisha looked up at him in confusion. Besides, aren't you more casual? Lawrence still looked like a homeless person, with an old coat and jeans, messy hair, and a Coke bottle in his hand. The only thing missing was a few flies floating around him. How can you compare to me? Lawrence glanced at him, full of doubts. Are you really from Ingzhou? Show some respect to your seniors. Newcomer. I would have forgotten if you didn't mention it. Huaisha raised his hand, tilted his head, and pointed at Shangye behind him. Do you know how to behave? Hurry up and get a chair for your senior and a fruit platter. Lawrence looked like
Forget it.
he was dying of tuberculosis.
I just came to remind you
at
to be
40
careful
years old.
at the banquet.
He took out another cigarette and lit it. The Huangchuan family might make things difficult for you. The Tiger King team dared to violate the ban and secretly sell banned drugs because they offered all the money. You defeated the Tiger King team. Even if Sheng Tianmu and Chiba think highly of you, the Huangchuan family might not let you go easily, especially since it's the Huangchuan family's home ground this time. Even Green Sun can't handle it. If it can't be handled, will the Huangchuan family just shout like they are now? Lawrence asked back. You rose to the top too quickly, and your foundation isn't stable. Many people want you to make a fool of yourself. Don't be embarrassed when the time comes. You've offended too many people, Huaisha, or at least most of them. Huaisha felt terrible. I've only been the leader for a few days, and you're telling me that I've offended everyone in the alliance? What else? Do you think the beer you poured wasn't enough to attract hatred? No one cares about that bit of money. Huaisha, why didn't anyone do it? From the beginning, you told everyone that you're different from them. Why do they like you? After saying that, Lawrence couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. Why do I look more like an Ingzhou person than you as a foreigner? Let me say this first. It's one thing to help you smooth things over with the 5 big bosses, but if you make everyone angry, I won't care. Is there a need for that? Huaisha was dumbfounded. Didn't I just open a water supply company? Let's say you have a business partner who works closely with you. For a long time, everyone has maintained a polite boundary, taking what they need and not asking about anything else. But these few days, he suddenly changed his usual behavior and started to use the hot weather as an excuse to give your employees subsidies, bonuses, and benefits. After saying that, Lawrence turned around and asked, Do you think this guy is up to no good and wants to mess with you? Huaisha frowned and couldn't control his anger. If these guys had any conscience, they would have given out their benefits earlier, right? When did you have the illusion that you have a conscience? Huaisha, only you would have such excessive pity for others. To be honest, you really don't look like a Green Sun at all. Then what do I look like? Huaisha was amused. Is it the Astronomy Society? Lawrence was also amused and patted him on the shoulder. If the Astronomy Society was filled with people like you, there would be no need for Green Sun to exist. In front of them, a black car stopped downstairs of Huaisha Business. The glass fell, and a bright old face appeared. With a smile, he waved enthusiastically. Oh, isn't this Mr. Lawrence? What a coincidence. Do you want to join us? No, I'll be there later, Lawrence replied. So, the old man looked at Huaisha and smiled even more enthusiastically. Then, Mr. Huaisha, let's go. The banquet is about to begin. Chapter 722. He always felt that this old thing was definitely up to no good. Seeing how happy he was, it was obvious that he was an old fox. He was a member of the Astronomy Association, almost made yet Russell's he didn't even pay for a meal in hell. Although he really wanted to use a set of fist techniques, such as you used to ignore me, to see what kind of fake now medicine. You can't reach me. This old man still had a little professional seeing him accept the gift. Being a spy. He immediately nodded out with satisfaction, a set of the most brilliant set of smiles, held the leader's hands tightly, forthright, and shook the good night. Get in the car and try on the clothes to see if they fit. But the sun is so good. How embarrassing. Why change places? Oh, it's a Bentley. Weisher raised his head, pointed behind him, and looked at the sun. Sit upstairs. He chuckled softly. Bueno, I prefer to be more open. Where the hell is Bueno? On the street below, and get me some water. Commercial company. There's no need to drink water. Casually took off his coat. I especially came to pick you up and threw it to Shania behind him. Here's good. I want to meet the young heroes under everyone's stunned gazes. Before the banquet starts, he unbuttoned his shirt collar, revealing his naked upper body, which was covered in scars, and said with a smile, and the hideous tattoo on his back. Why do we walk and talk on the way? The flowing texture of the skin glowed, but his marble under the afternoon sun. He looked down at his man's movements and showed a beauty of his body and strength. I'm going to the Alliance's displayed on the street. I haven't changed on his back, my clothes under the cold and solemn door. Look how inappropriate they are. The evil spirit with the bell on his back laughed. I'll catch up later. Under those stunned gazes, I know that Weisher tilted his neck, raised his legs, kicked off the shoes on his feet, and unbuttoned the pants that he had bought subordinate beside him. Apart from his underwear, raised the box his muscular body and opened it, exposed, revealing a full set of exquisite clothes that were strictly tailored. His muscles were not so strong that it was paired with a tie. However, at this moment, anyone who witnessed it would be able to understand how much power was hidden in this. I ordered the tailor at home to make this overnight, following the beating of his heart. His blood turned into a torrent, revealing his white teeth, and an illusory echo burst out from under his body. Without feeling if you're not used to Western embarrassment, the tailor also made robes and feather opened his arms without waiting for Weisher to reply, showing off his almost perfect body. Hand. He was like had no intention of letting go. Walking on the street at the driver in broad daylight. The driver stood off his unparalleled walked out of the driver's seat, just like that. Towards he reached out and took the dress handmaid. He raised his hand and handed over the top-grade materials from Shanya's hands along with two brand new driver's licenses. Every button. This is for you. He covered his body. Shania was holding something insignificant restraint. His hands were trembling, that could be described and he was frozen miracle and on the spot. To once again hide he didn't in the dare darkness. To take it. But finally, he also didn't dare lifted to the gloomy bangs on his forehead. It's just a car, and tied them behind his head, revealing his curved horns. Since President Heavenly Eyes the restraint of his tie, just take it. The naked, if you miss this opportunity, unbelievably, we won't be able to under the contrast of the solemn dress. Weisher glanced he became a dignified gentleman, then turned around. Weisher turned and looked at the old man and asked him, "How does this? I still have to thank you for your kindness." And answered respectfully. The other party had already arranged for her to be at her doorstep. Don't let the adults be modest about. Weisher opened the car door and smiled at the old man in the car. After all, we don't have much time. No rush, YG June. Sheng Tian, Mu scrutinized his appearance soon, and raised his head to laugh. The car started and disappeared. We still have a lot of time. In the silence, Lawrence smoked and looked blankly in the direction where the car disappeared. He began to think. Have you all King forgotten about me? The banquet was held in the manor of the Huangchuan family, one of the 5 high-ranking members of the Alliance. Deep in the mountains outside the capital, outside the ancient and quiet manor, there was a lot of traffic and people coming and going. Nominally, it was the engagement ceremony between the second son of the Huangchuan family and the eldest daughter of the Luoha family, who was also one of the 5 high-ranking members. But in reality, at this critical juncture, it had become a serious meeting between the 5 high-ranking members. It was likely that all the decisions and directions of the alliance would be finalized here for a long time in the future. Among the 5 families, Tianmu, Luoha, Zhuo, Chiba, and Huangchuan, the Tianmu family's main foundation was shipping, smuggling, and now the ocean fishing industry. The Luoha family was in the gambling industry. The Zhuo family was in electronic products. The Chiba family was in loan sharks and illegal investments. As for the Huangchuan family, they were in the extreme of traditional, illegal labor and sweatshop industry. Generally speaking, after reaching the level of the 5 high-ranking members, they would start to slowly get rid of the illegal industries in their hands. After washing away the bloodshed, they would become legal capital. But in Yingzhou, there was no such thing as a hybrid. How could the Gong family and Wu family allow them to grow and rise? Over a long period of time, the Anesthetic Hunting Alliance had formed a network in the dark. Through the existence of the 5 high-ranking members, they had united all the hybrids in Yingzhou. That was how the alliance reached its current scale. Even so, they still couldn't change the situation. In an environment where there were many strong enemies, once the alliance tried to expand beyond the inner circle of Danbo, they would be suppressed and attacked. After a long time, the alliance gave up on the idea of expansion and gradually lost its cohesion. But this time, it was different from the past. If they didn't unite, the so-called hybrid alliance would be divided and devoured by the other parties the day after the order was given. Do you think what I said makes sense? Why, Zhikuan? Makes sense, makes perfect sense. After listening to Tianmu's analysis, Huaisher nodded vigorously. But there is only one question. Why are you telling me this? He raised his hand and pointed at his face. What is the Why Zhikuan group in the alliance? What am I to you? What's the use of a nobody knowing all this? Sandalwood leaves are fragrant. Why Zhikuan? How can a person like you be unknown because of a moment of hardship? Tianmu narrowed his eyes and smiled. He told him straightforwardly, I think highly of you and hope that you can become my assistant. You have so many assistants in the Tianmu family. It doesn't matter if you don't have one, right? Huaisher shrugged indifferently and asked, Moreover, can Lord Tianmu be at ease with an assistant of unknown origin like me? Understanding each other is indeed a necessary process. But just like how I don't understand you, why Zhikuan, do you understand me? Through the information recorded on paper and the rumors from other people's mouths, is this really considered understanding? Even if I entrust my life to you, is this really considered trust? Does that count as being honest? Tianmu grinned. That's not right, is it? Did the so-called trust really exist for an extreme Tao cultivator? Why Zhikuan? We have re-established the rules in the chaotic zone, but in essence we still continue the survival of wild beasts. The so-called wild beasts only need to smell each other to know if they are of the same kind. Huaisher smiled. Then, am I of the same kind as you? Are you kidding? Of course not. Otherwise, would I dare to recruit you? Why Zhikuan? Tianmu laughed and told him, You still have such a thing as conscience. It was because of this that he dared to have a little hope for him, the benevolence that the Iron King Party did not have, the rationality that the Heavenly Fool Company did not have, the ambition that the Six Directions Society and the Great Circle did not have, the bloodline that the Russian Federation K Party could not fake, and even the price that the Illumination Church could not pay for being undercover, not to mention those high and mighty Gong and Wu families. In the end, after Green Sun's verification, he still had a conscience that extreme Tao did not have. It was like an elephant, and a whale that did not belong to this place appeared in the midst of fighting wild beasts. Such a strong sense of existence was as if it was glowing and could not be ignored. Please help me. Why Zhikuan? Come to my side. Tianmu stretched out his hand and sincerely invited, in order to save the Danbo inner circle, to save the alliance, help me get the position of the alliance's president. In silence, Huaisher lowered his head and looked at the wrinkled palm. After a long time, he suddenly asked, What you said is very good, but these are all things you get, aren't they? He asked, My reward, where are the things I deserve? That depends on how much you can get. Tianmu smiled and told him, As long as you can get them. Huai Jikun, they are all yours. In the alliance, you can easily grow stronger as long as you are under me. Even if you want to be under me, there is no problem. I promise you in the name of Tianmu Tsang that this is the covenant between you and me. It still sounds no different from an empty promise. Huaisher laughed softly. Deal. Huaisher, the member of the Astronomy Association, stopped right in front of the wide gate, and the light outside the door illuminated their smiling faces. Each had his own ulterior motives. Chapter 723. Oh, Lord Sheng Tianmu, please forgive me for not coming out to meet you. As soon as he got out of the car, an old man who looked like a deacon greeted him. Once you get to the top, you will definitely do some messy things. Thank you for coming from afar. Maybe everyone will instigate you. Please come in, and you will brainlessly make enemies everywhere. I don't need anyone to lead the way. You see, you can't even stand my provocation. When the leader of the Iron King party sees you, the deacon was stunned, snorts at you. He hesitated. Won't you start a full-scale war? Family head, the head of the Zhou family, no need to find excuses, and raised his head with Luaha and Jimmy somewhere, right? Of course, you're the best. When you were young and strong, it doesn't matter. You dared to fight. Just take me there, and you're good have to trouble you to lead the way. To be honest, you're when the Chiba family comes later. Sheng Tianmu and spread his forward casually. The Zhou family doesn't have many people. As for this, why? Even if I give you the alliance, you can't mobilize to the table, right? He gave the order without any explanation. Don't say anything. It was as if he was the owner here. I'm discriminating under his gaze. Although you're very capable. Was stunned, and I really after a long while, he nodded with a hunchback. Out that a woman is in charge. Please allow me to pass on the message. Let alone outsiders. Don't young even people the subordinates like to use phones nowadays? I'll just call them directly. Family glanced at him coldly, secrets and didn't say anything. She was well aware of this. Barged his way at the beginning, relying on his identity as one of the five elders. Away from the position of leader. The quiet room so of the she was happy to watch the show. She had opened the door this old man for too long, so she didn't mind giving him a little more trouble. The old man grinned as for Qian and waved his hand at the few unhappy faces. He's a good choice, that had turned their heads. His personality. Are you guys talking about some shady things behind this old man's back? Can I listen to it too? Who can bring he pulled the cushion over and sat up into collapse. He raised his hand, make it bigger and stronger. Go on, go on. However, just pretend that after he becomes the leader, hey, who's that? He'll definitely give me a cup of tea. The brothels let me taste the harvest of the and then play with hundreds of women. Tea garden this in the end, he'll be killed in bed by a woman or something. After saying that, the man with the smoking pipe was wearing a after mocking all his opponents. He knelt on the ground, recommended himself, and looked over. It was the head of the Joe family. I'm already so old. He looked to be in his 40s. I can't even get hard. But his hair was white. Am I very reliable? He was aging Everyone's expression didn't look good. The head of the Luoha family before he could say anything. Huang Chuan as the retorted, only woman among the five argument elders. Started again. She looked no different from the traditional older women smelled of red wine and perfume. She was dressed in a simple and solemn robe. Her hair was tied up in a bun. All right, and her expression was cold and calm. After being disturbed by this old man, will follow the rules no one was in the mood to continue and decide the winner in the alliance meeting. Even though he didn't hear anything, on his knees, and spoke, or couldn't help all of you are done. Let this old man say was ridiculous. He smiled happily 3 minutes and asked straightforwardly, "Did that guy from how about letting me be the leader of this year's meeting? Old man's trap as for the money, it's negotiable. At the same time, we won't mistreat anyone." Finally experienced something that outsiders couldn't help but experience. He even made a gesture of counting silent violence. He looked and the noisy meeting hall was filled to the brim. Are you dreaming? The atmosphere was lively. Of the Huang Chuan, all of the leaders from the alliance were drinking tea and chatting. Can I do the same? Happily. Can't I? The atmosphere was lively. It's because you're not suitable. Only the area within 3 meters of Huaishur was as cold as ice, and not a single sound could be heard. Everyone sat up straight and drank their tea without looking sideways, apart from the Huang Chuan clan's servants, who occasionally came over to refill their cups. No one paid him any attention. Under these circumstances, Huaishur was so bored that he began to scratch his feet. There was nothing he could do about it. All of the signals here had been blocked, and even the astronomy meeting's channel had been disrupted. However, if he used origin substances to communicate, the chances of being discovered were too high. He had long since been silenced. He couldn't even play with his phone. He could only watch a few geishas twist and turn as they played, which made him want to yawn. He wanted the servants here to find him a manga to read, but the servants all said that they didn't know where it was. What a joke! Later, when the higher-ups speak and you read the manga, you'll be amused. Once the higher-ups see it, they'll remember it in their hearts. But what if they investigate who gave this idiot the manga? Would they still want their little thumbs? Huaishur quickly gave up. After all, he read manga for fun. But fun was just fun. If he really wanted to have fun, he had to have more fun. As the saying went, if the fun didn't come, the fun would come again. If you don't want to play with me, then I'll play by myself. Huaishur raised his hand and called the servants over. He pointed at the geishas and zither players twisting and turning and said, "Call one of them over. I want to pick a song." When the geishas came over respectfully, he rubbed his chin and looked at the white powder that was falling from her face. He suddenly asked, "Do you know how to play Gokura Kujodo?" The geishas was stunned and shook her head. "Forget it. I don't think you know how to play those vulgar ones. Let's play an elegant one." Huaishur patted the table and said, "Let's play Swan Lake." The geishas was stunned and showed an awkward and polite smile. She began to curse in her mind. What the hell was wrong with her? She looked good, but what was wrong with her brain? Not to mention that she didn't know how to dance. Even if she did, she had to be able to dance in this dress. Guest, do you have anything else you want to see? She reluctantly squeezed out a smile and looked behind her awkwardly. She meant that it was fine if he didn't know how to appreciate it, but he didn't want to stop her from making money. Huaisher also wanted to see a two-person rotation, but after thinking for a while, he realized that there was only one geishas. She couldn't even sing a little widow visiting a grave. He suddenly lost interest and sighed, waved his hand, and said, "You can go." The geishas felt as if she had been granted amnesty. She got up in a hurry and was ready to run away, but the musician behind her was stopped. "Hey, the dancer is leaving." "Why are you leaving?" Huaisher reached out and pointed at the shamisen in the musician's hand. "Lend me that thing." The musician instinctively wanted to refuse, but when he was stared at by that pair of eyes, he stiffened and his fingers couldn't help but tremble. But when the man grinned, he felt a burst of intimacy and affection from the bottom of his heart. He remembered what his mother said to his uncle when he was young. "The child is still young and doesn't know anything. Just let him play with it." Every time he said that, his uncle's face would show a generous smile, which he would remember for the rest of his life. When he recovered from his memories, the shamisen in his hand had already been pulled out by Huaisher. Huaisher held it in his hand as if he was holding a pipa. After casually plucking it twice, he felt that something was wrong. So he reached out and pulled out the remaining plectrum in the musician's hand. "Io, this little thing is similar to a guitar." Holding the shamisen in his arms, Huaisher tried a few notes. There were various plucking skills in the cello, so it wasn't difficult to get started. Cello playing was of such a high level, so how could there be any barriers? Besides, who only knew how to play one instrument? When he was a child, he practiced four-hand duet with Ai Ching. Thinking about it, he really missed it. Recalling the past, Huaisher's mouth evoked a nostalgic smile. He lowered his head and plucked the shamisen. The low sound, like the cold sound of ice breaking, spread in all directions, making the noise in the venue stagnate. Immediately, the dexterous notes jumped in everyone's ears. With incomparable joy and jubilation, "Me, hum, la, me, hum, hum." It was so familiar, as if the prelude was engraved in the DNA, flowing briskly. Huaisher raised his eyebrows and shook his head in this nostalgic melody. "Hey, young man." Chapter 724. "Hey, young man." As soon as he opened his mouth to sing, Huaisher felt that something was not quite right. His fingers paused, and he looked up at those indescribable expressions. "Sorry, I strung it. Let's start again." His fingers on the strings changed, and the originally dense and strange melody turned into a scattered nursery rhyme, gentle and tactful. Two tigers, running fast, running fast. One is missing a finger, The other is missing an eye. So strange, visible to the naked eye. The expression of the one-eyed, brawny man next to him, who was missing a little finger, began to quickly turn ugly. He seemed to have sung wrongly again, but it did not matter. Huaishur shook his head indifferently. His fingers danced on the strings of the shamisen. The melodious melody instantly became sad and solemn, making people want to cry. After playing 2 verses of the Great Compassion Mantra, it seamlessly switched to the Wedding March, followed by a section of Cayman, and finally an adapted version that was 1 step away. He was beaming with joy and enjoying himself. If it were not for the fear of exposing his identity, Huaishur would have wanted to show everyone Paganini's unique skill of playing an entire song with 1 string. It was just that the instrument in his hand was not strong enough. The range was narrow. Once it went beyond the range, it seemed light and difficult to control. Otherwise, he could have played a Northwest folk song. After 5 minutes of research, Huaishur paused for a moment. He felt that he had completely mastered this instrument. When his fingers pressed again, a sharp sound erupted from the strings under the plectrum. It was loud and ear-piercing, like steel rubbing against each other. It was different from the performance of the ordinary shamisen. It was close to noise, but noise did not have such a melody and rhythm. The story was about how the prosperous edge of clan fell and to the Minamoto clan's ferocious attacks, violently crushing and after the battle of Genji and Ping. After covering the noise, the Ping clan fell apart everyone's and was destroyed. Teasing it could only be said that the meaning was not the loud and closed noise turned into a low he finished and singing, silent one. The people on both low sides aftertaste were already glaring like the shamisen. Immediately like after, iron strings of he averted his gaze as if he had been electrocuted and lowered his eyes respectfully. Rings. It telling that the affairs of the world finished singing the entire song that she noticed the Borneo trees lose their color when she was about to sing another verse to decline like the vicissitudes of life. That she noticed the strange narrowed his eyes and chanted in a low voice. He also heard the gentle breathing behind him. A melancholy lingered in the air. He was instantly stunned. The arrogant, even though his origin substance had just like a dream in a someone was still able to walk ferocious 3 steps just like the triggering his perception. If they were harboring evil intentions, only the plectrum in his hand slipped, and he slowly turned his head around. In Ingzhou, he saw it could be said to be white traditional instrumental on the tatama mat. The exquisite embroidery of the dress outlined the contours of a pear blossom. The pure white petals scattered against the green background, creating an indescribably harmonious scene. The newcomer's delicate face was hidden under the short hair that reached her shoulders. She lowered her head to look at Su Chen's face. Suddenly, she smiled slightly and patted him on the shoulder. Huaishur, this is the Huangchuan clan's banquet. Don't go overboard. Otherwise, the owner of this place will teach you a lesson. Heaven-eyed Pear Blossom smiled slightly, then raised her head to look at the people who had been looking for trouble, being stared at by her. The few people who originally had ugly expressions on their faces lowered their heads and bowed respectfully. The source of the disaster disappeared without a trace. Pear Blossom retracted her gaze in satisfaction, then lowered her head and said to Huaishur, "If you're bored, why don't you come and sit here? I'm pretty bored sitting here by myself anyway." Her smile was full of smiles, and she did not hide her friendliness and fondness. But for some reason, Huaishur felt a strong sense of resistance and uneasiness in his heart. It was as if he sensed some indescribable danger from her. When she looked at him with her slender fox-like eyes, all his secrets seemed to be exposed. He subconsciously raised his guard. But Heaven-eyed Pear Blossom did not care about Huaishur's intentions. She walked forward by herself, and when she sat down at the front of the hall, she waved at Huaishur and pointed at the seat beside her. Huaishur was dumbfounded. What's the meaning of this? Under everyone's gaze, he was stunned for a long time. In the end, he could only pick up the native pipa he had stolen, walk over, and sit down obediently. Then He felt the jealous and envious gazes from below, and he felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles.
Pear Blossom suddenly asked.
You play pretty well.
Luckily, I've learned a little.
Heaven-eyed Pear Blossom nodded and suggested curiously, Then why don't you play Gokuraku Jodo? I saw that you liked it a lot just now. In the silence, Huaisher lowered his head and looked at the shamisen in his arms. He raised his head and solemnly refused. Big miss, I sell my body, not my skills. Ha ha, you fellow are really interesting. Heaven-eyed Pear Blossom laughed loudly. Her eyes turned and looked at Huaisher meaningfully. Then playing a cello song is not bad. Hee, cello? What is that? Huaisher calmly asked. Can it be eaten? I keep feeling that you will be very good at it. Could it be an illusion? Pear Blossom laughed innocently. Ha ha, Pear Blossom, don't force the newcomer. Deep footsteps sounded. After the paper door was pushed open, heaven-eyed Pear Blossom walked out. Behind him was a group of extreme Tao leaders with complicated expressions. You guys seem to be getting along well. He looked at Huaisher with satisfaction. He raised his head and asked Pear Blossom, How is it, Pear Blossom? Does this young hero of the Huaisher group enter your eyes? Pear Blossom respectfully bowed her head and said gently, reporting to father, Mr. Huaisher is very elegant. He is the type that Pear Blossom likes. Ah, if that's the case, then you have to cultivate your feelings. Heaven-eyed Pear Blossom laughed loudly. Hey, old bastard, today is your father's son's engagement ceremony. What are you so proud of? Huang Chuan was angry. He coldly glanced at Huaisher. Moreover, the final result is not certain yet. Don't be happy too early. Look at you. How can two young people be in love with each other get in the way of your business? If this spreads out, it will also be a good story. Heaven-eyed Pear Blossom helplessly shook his head. Moreover, since this old man dared to promise you, I definitely have the confidence to win. How can I casually accept unfavorable conditions? Bastard. Huang Chuan's face flushed red, and even the tattoo on his neck turned black. If it weren't for the fact that there were other people stopping him, he might have already given this old man a good beating. After a long time, he finally calmed down and sat down on the main seat, loudly reprimanding the servants to quickly serve the wine and dishes. The banquet went much smoother than expected. After all, no one's mind was on the food. Good wine and good dishes were tasteless, like chewing wax. The atmosphere became even more solemn and oppressive. No one dared to laugh or speak loudly. From time to time, they would look at the 5 big shots sitting at the head of the table. They were waiting for the most important part of this banquet, the announcement that would determine the fate and future of the entire alliance. It would appear that everyone is impatient and slowly put down his bowl before looking at the others. Huang Chuan's expression was gloomy. Qian Yi and Long Air smiled frivolously. The female general of the Luoha family lowered her eyes, and Jiu's expression was as calm as ever. He paused for a moment and said, Then, after all this time, thanks to the love of everyone in the alliance, the few of us will jointly— All right, let me do it. I'll let you talk until tomorrow. Qian Yilong Air sighed and interrupted his nonsense. He raised his voice and said, I'm sure everyone here has heard of this rumor. To put it bluntly, in order to deal with the upcoming situation, we will better unite the strength of the alliance. From today onwards, the alliance will abandon the rule of having 5 big shots as the chairman and elect a new chairman. Everyone here is at extreme Tao, so there's no need to play with hypocritical processes and tricks. If you have any ideas, you can speak freely. If anyone feels that their ability and popularity are enough and they are not satisfied with the position of being below others, you can also stand up now and compete for the chairman's position. He paused for a moment and looked down at those faces. Suddenly, he raised his voice. Does such a person exist? In an instant, in the dead silence, everyone kneeling on the ground lowered their heads in unison, bowing their heads respectfully to the 5 big shots sitting at the head of the table. Only Huaisher, who was holding a bowl of rice and had not finished eating, was stunned on the spot. He was hesitating whether he should raise his hand and join in the fun. Since he was already here, it was not like he had to pay to try. However, the strange gaze of the nearby Heaven Eye Pear Blossom always made him feel as if there was a blade on his back, as if he was being seen through. He did not know if he had been exposed or not. If he stood up and Li Hua pointed at him and reported to everyone that this dog called Huaisher was a lackey of the Astronomical Association, then everyone would not care about the rules of the martial arts world and just kill him together without holding back. At that time, wouldn't he be in trouble? In the silence, the 5 big shots glanced at those who bowed their heads. They paused for a moment on Huaisher, who was still eating with his head lowered. Soon, they left coldly. Only Huang Chuan's gaze became gloomier. After a long time, after confirming that no one wanted to take the chairman's position, Qian Yi and Long Air retracted their gaze and nodded slowly. Since that's the case, then let's follow the usual practice and vote internally. Before he finished speaking, Sheng Tianmu raised his hand with a smile and said, I'll vote for myself. This old man will vote for himself. Please support me, everyone. Chapter 7:25. As soon as Sheng Tianmu finished speaking, Huang Chuan glared at him, unwilling to be outdone. He also raised his hand and said, I'll also vote for myself. Sheng Tianmu and Huang Chuan each had 1 vote. That left 3 people. The head of the Jiu clan smoked his pipe and glanced around at everyone. He tapped his pipe and said, My decision is still the same as before. My vote is for Huang Chuan. Huang Chuan had 2 votes. Qian Yi Long Air gripped his wine cup and chuckled. Then I'll join in on the fun and vote for Elder Sheng Tianmu. Ha ha ha, I owe him quite a few favors. Sheng Tianmu had 2 votes. In the end, everyone's gazes fell on the last person of the 5. The Luaha clan's head didn't even raise her head as she said, I'm not interested in being the president. It doesn't matter to me who becomes the president. She said coldly, I abstain. The result was no different from the meeting before the banquet. 2 against 2. Sheng Tianmu and Huang Chuan stared at each other. The old man cracked a smile and asked, You're not going to give up, Huang Chuan brat? Unfortunately, I hate people who take advantage of their seniority to ride on my head, the Huang Chuan clan's head said indifferently. The leader of the Huang Chuan family said indifferently, Since you have a chance of winning, then I'll take the 2 votes myself. So, we'll follow the rules? Sheng Tianmu asked. Huang Chuan nodded. Then we'll follow the rules. But this time is different. He paused for a moment, his expression becoming cold and fierce. I want to test my swords. Below the stage, Huaisher paused in the middle of eating. He suddenly felt a chill run down his neck. He abruptly raised his head, just in time to meet Sheng Tianmu's smiling, expectant gaze. He smelled the familiar scent of an arrangement. The food in his mouth no longer tasted as good. 10 minutes later, Huaisher felt unwell. When the people of Incontinent called it a trial, it meant a duel. It was just like how a chef's trial was a competition of cooking. Unfortunately, a trial of swords wasn't a competition of who could forge faster with their bare hands. It was a duel of swords and spears. Unless blood was spilled, the duel wouldn't stop. It could really kill people. The competition forbade the use of border relics, stigmata, and even origin substance techniques. In a literal sense, the two sides would compete in swordsmanship. Of course, the big shots definitely wouldn't go down personally, not to mention getting hurt. It was impossible for them to even bump into each other. The dirty and tiring work could only be done by his subordinates. Now, Huaisher, who had been enthusiastically signed up, stood in front of Sheng Tianmu with a dumbfounded expression.
Aren't there two other people besides you?
Sheng Tianmu gave him the treasured sword in his hand, looked at the two ascendants and patted with
his
solemn and cold expressions,
indicating that he had been
strengthened. Just by looking at the way they walked and the way they used their muscles,
do you trust me that much?
one could tell that they were not easy to deal with,
in confusion.
not to mention the murderous aura and the smell of blood on their bodies. Given the size of the Sheng Tianmu clan, wouldn't it be easy for him to find a few helpers? It would have been better if he hadn't mentioned this. Huaisher's eyelids twitched wildly. But the problem is that even if the three of us worked together, we probably wouldn't be able to defeat one of them. As he spoke, he didn't try to hide anything. His two teammates immediately turned around and glared at him angrily. If it weren't for the fact that Sheng Tianmu was still alive, he would have already attacked Huaisher. But the problem was, Huaisher felt like he wasn't wrong at all. In order to make Sheng Tianmu accept the rules, the Huangchuan clan had only sent one person. He was currently sitting on the other side of the field with his eyes closed. The silent and wooden middle-aged man was kneeling on the ground, an ordinary-looking blade resting on his knees. The blade's length and weight were both very standard. Any ascendant could tell that he didn't have any stigmata on his body. He was just a white tear ascendant. Occasionally, when he raised his eyes to refuse the water offered by the people next to him, his eyes weren't lively. Instead, they were dull, as if his mind was elsewhere. But Huaisher felt a strong premonition of death from that person, especially when he was holding this sword. Intuition told him that using the rules of the sword to fight Ingzhou swordsmanship in close-quarters combat with this person was a dead end. "Who's that person?" Huaisher asked in a low voice. "I heard that he's from a dojo." Sheng Tianmu replied, thoughtfully, "I heard that he's a registered disciple. He must be very powerful." "Dojo? Which dojo?" Huaisher was confused. Sheng Tianmu shook his head. "Nonsense. In the entire Ingzhou, which other dojo could be called a dojo other than Sword Saint Shangxuan's dojo?" Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air, then sucked in another breath of cold air. He sucked in cold air like crazy. The central air conditioner in the Huangchuan clan was about to be sucked dry by him, but he couldn't stop. Damn it, why do I feel like I'm going to die this time? Sword Saint Shangxuan was a famous old monster among Ingzhou's sublimators. He was recognized as the #1 in the world in Ingzhou for the past 50 years. His strength was unfathomable. He had countless disciples and granddisciples. Countless people in the Wu and Gong families had been taught by him. His swordsmanship was divine. Huaisher's attainments in Ingzhou's swordsmanship came from Elder Luo's general weapon teaching class. He was using it like a stick. Sword Saint Shangxuan's swordsmanship was at least LV 25. His skills were divine, and he was at the peak. He was invincible. Such an exaggerated term was used to describe a powerhouse whose talent, experience, and even effort and focus could be counted on one's fingers. Some people even said that if it weren't for the Sword Saint's eccentric and perverse personality and his unwillingness to get involved in the battle of the present, the dispute between the Gong and Wu families would have ended long ago. Huaisher once tried to fan the flames by asking Elder Luo, "Old man, if you and the Sword Saint fought, who would win?" Then Elder Luo pressed him to the ground and gave him a good beating. He was almost sent to the ICU. Later, When he heard that Elder Luo's future was cut off, he thanked Elder Luo from the bottom of his heart for not killing him. Perhaps the biggest regret of the muscular old man's life in martial arts was that he could no longer have a carefree duel with such an opponent. Back then, when he punched the founder into the abyss, he also cut off his future while cutting off all grudges. Now, even if the heretic king was solidified, he was still invincible in the abyss. He was like a fish in water in the golden dawn. Just look at the battle on the Stellaris. The old man fought 1 against 4, and he even dismantled the mechs with his bare hands. It was like playing, and he was extremely fierce. If Elder Luo was in his complete form, he would have been fighting all over the world. How could it be Senior Sister's turn? Now, he was a villain who had only learned 3 moves from 10 experience classes in the Orchard Gym. Now, he was going to compete with the Sword Saint's disciple in pure swordsmanship. Thinking about it, he felt that his future was bleak. Where did you get such confidence in me? Huaishir was puzzled by old man Sheng Tianmu's choice. Of course, it's because Li Hua thinks that you are very powerful, Sheng Tianmu said with a serious face. Let me tell you, Li Hua has a good eye. She said you can do it, so of course I think you can do it. Huaishir looked back at the arena in a daze. Li Hua also smiled and gave him a thumbs up, indicating that he could do it. Huaishir felt that he was going crazy. How is it? Can't you feel the trust this old man has in you? Sheng Tianmu smiled and comforted him. Don't be nervous. Maybe it won't be your turn. Akutagawa and White Butterfly are both 1 in a million. Moreover, the rule this time is 1 book win. Maybe if you are lucky, you will win after taking 1 book. Before he finished speaking, a cold announcement came from the arena. Small hand. There was a moment of dead silence. After the sound of steel scraping, the referee's voice sounded. The winner has been decided. The whole process didn't even take a second. When Huaishir looked back, he only saw the man called White Butterfly stagger back and fall on his back. Blood gushed out like a fountain. The long sword fell to the ground, along with his 2 hands that were holding the sword. Together with the blade, armor, flesh, and even bones, they were all cleanly cut off by the sword. At the beginning of the match, before the first round had even ended, the representative of the Arakawa Kai, Katori Ichiro, had scored a point. Huaishir was stunned in place. After the dull man pulled out his sword, he became cold and aggressive. His eyes burned with aggressive flames, tyrannical and insufferably arrogant, ignoring Arakawa, who was laughing and praising beside him. He raised his eyes and looked over like a ferocious beast. Next, grinding his teeth and sucking blood, he couldn't wait. On the sidelines, Akutagawa, who was putting on his armor, stiffened for a moment. His expression became heavy, and he expressionlessly put on his mask. This was also a preferential treatment from his opponent. If he didn't even wear his armor, not to mention the danger to his life, he might not even have the power to fight back in front of Katori Ichiro. Even the system of winning and losing is accommodating to you. That was what Arakawa said. Now it seemed that he was right. Huaishir narrowed her eyes as she sensed the swift and fierce aura behind her. She could feel the hair on the back of her hand standing on end. There was a tearing sound in the stagnant wind, echoing in the air. Something sharp appeared and disappeared in a flash, completely destroying everything. This kind of swordsmanship was terrifying. He shouldn't have talked nonsense with Sheng Tengnu, otherwise he would have seen something just now. He focused all his attention on the field. Under everyone's witness, Akutagawa, who was covered in protective gear, walked into the field step by step. Both sides bowed meticulously, then drew their swords. With the referee in front of them, their swords clashed and touched for a moment. Both of them slowly took a step back. Fair and square. The referee raised his hand and chopped down. Let's decide the winner. In an instant, a thunderous roar burst out from under the mask. The sound of the explosion was so loud that it even cracked the mask from the inside. It was Akutagawa's roar. The terrifying roar spread in an instant. Everyone's vision blurred, and even their thoughts stopped for a moment. Ki fusion. It was one of the most common techniques in kendo. When the sword was drawn, one would combine the spirit and physical strength of the breath with the shout, and then burst out all the power in an instant, ignoring the opponent's movements. One would use all his strength to push the speed to the peak. After disregarding life and death, Akutagawa changed the structure in his hand from the star eye to the upper part and chopped down. Face. In kendo, the most effective points of attack were the face, hands, abdomen, and throat. Face was undoubtedly a blow to the head. Akutagawa's fighting style at this moment was completely the path of mutual destruction. After learning the lesson of white butterfly, Akutagawa did not do any defense at all. He used ki fusion to gain an instant opportunity, gave up all defense, and launched an all-in attack. As long as he hit, regardless of whether he could win or survive, it was equivalent to winning. This was the sword of sacrifice. Unfortunately, Katori Ichiro was not affected by ki fusion at all. His expression was still cold. At the moment of contact, everyone heard his low and calm voice. Bang! The cold blade pierced through Akutagawa's back. Blood spurted out along the sword hilt and fell on Katori's 10 fingers. The winner was decided. Katori pulled out the blade expressionlessly and threw the dying Akutagawa on the ground. He raised his head and looked at Huaishur. Next, the last one. Okay, you really want to fight 3 at once? In the silence, under everyone's gaze, Huaishur sighed, shrugged, got up and walked to the field. He drew his sword. Although he didn't know if there was a rule in Ingzhou, he suddenly realized that he seemed to have a slight chance of winning. Then, after 10 lessons in the orchard gym, the new kendo trainee, who was best at singing, dancing, and playing the cello, White Paper Doll, come out. Chapter 726. It was as if he hadn't seen the tragic defeat of his 2 companions. Holding Simu's sword in his hand, the white doll stepped into the arena, relaxed and comfortable. He drew the sword and waved it twice. He couldn't help but sigh. Whether it was weight, length, or even ease of use, it was far inferior to resentment. Not good. Isn't this a few years old? He turned back and asked, Rather than calling it a weapon, it's better to call it an antique. It should be quite expensive, right? Shouldn't it be properly preserved? Things like swords have no meaning once they become antiques. It's best to use them while they're still usable. Simu waved his hand indifferently. As the saying goes, make the best use of everything. If tools don't break, then isn't there no meaning? As an experienced tool user, Huaishir could sense the deep malice of this world. He held the sword in his hand and swung it twice. The blade actually hummed. He felt that it would be more convenient to wield a stick of this length. He didn't realize at all how awkward his posture was in the eyes of a professional. Across from him, Katori Ichiro couldn't help but frown. The name of a blade covered in dust, entrusted to the wrong person. This was probably the situation, right? All right. Huaishir nodded. But in reality, this was exactly what his opponent wanted. He raised his head, Ichiro Katori was deliberately waiting for his opponent to make a move, came forward with waiting for his opponent to reveal an opening. Huaishir didn't even with his profound attainments in martial arts, he waved his hand. He would calmly evade his opponent's attacks and strike at his opponent's weak points. His words. In the end, Sima's expression he would achieve the effect for a moment of instantly defeating his opponent with a single strike. Revealed a mocking expression. Once you disregarded the use of origin substances, you're courting death. This kind of pure swordsmanship duel, she stretched her neck nonchalantly and finally raised her head and physiology. To look at her opponent. It was true that strength, speed, is that really your reflexes, name? Forget it. So on, it doesn't matter if it's a fake name. However, he stared at even a single Ichiro's cold face. The final result and suddenly could be completely different. Aren't you? But the most important thing was Ichiro's face was to a highly accomplished martial artist as if he hadn't heard him at all. Everything in front of him as if he couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the words from ancient times until now. Huaishir lowered his head. Almost all of the variations in swordsmanship had been explored by his predecessors. Then he suddenly said that if one were to trace back the history of any duel in any dojo, wouldn't have failed. They would be able to find similar examples. Although that sacrificial sword was too crude, every single and unsightly could be found. It shouldn't have ended up in such a sorry state. Just even like without chi fusion, shogi and Chinese wouldn't have fallen so if quickly. One accidentally fell into a set pattern was defeated and allowed their opponent to grasp the sequence of events. You gave him too much pressure. They would basically be doomed to misunderstand. This was what it meant to bully others you were with great merit. In the instant he didn't realize it at all, raised his sacrificial it's dark sword. Under the lamp. More than 100,000 ways to counter it appeared. He didn't have time to notice it. And he didn't even need to think the sound of the wind. Pure, but just muscle memory he had would seen allow him to make the most clearly. Appropriate response. Akutagawa, for example, taken if Huaishir had dared to use the drummer and emperor's steps in front of Luoxian, he would definitely have been thrashed in the end. These were things that people were already tired of playing with. It was like displaying one's slight skill in front of an expert. In the eyes of an outsider, this duel was 3 against 1. And it was unfair. In reality, the opposite was true. From the beginning, there was a great disparity between victory and defeat. Ichiro Katori was almost standing in a position where he would definitely win. Of course, even without the obstruction of the armor, Akutagawa's reflexes probably wouldn't have been able to reverse the situation. But if he had chosen to defend and play conservatively from the beginning, even if he couldn't win in the end, he wouldn't have lost so quickly and tragically. After listening to Huaishir's words, Ichiro Katori was still expressionless, but his gaze towards Huaishir became unhappy. You don't understand kendo at all, do you? He finally spoke, full of indifference. Yes, that's right. Huaishir nodded frankly. I haven't learned it at all. He didn't know anything about Xianshi residual heart and Ji Gu. He didn't know anything about stance, blade tendon, or footwork. But I've seen a lot of martial arts competitions in manga and TV dramas, he said in a trembling voice. Rounding it off, it's equivalent to me knowing it. The corners of Ichiro Katori's eyes twitched, and he couldn't hide his anger and killing intent. No matter who it was, it would be difficult for them to calm down when they heard the thing they had devoted their life to being belittled and looked down upon. Not only him, but the other people in the audience also booed. If it weren't for the wrong occasion, they would probably have booed. Huaishir, on the other hand, was still spouting nonsense. Your swordsmanship is indeed very powerful. Your ability to see through the enemy's moves is also very strong. No, very strong. There are almost no gaps or weaknesses. He paused for a moment and suddenly smiled. But you didn't realize that you have a fatal flaw. As he spoke, Huaishir raised his hand and pointed at his face. Have you noticed that I'm taller than you? In an instant, the witness in Kyoto in the audience almost collapsed. Even the audience found it difficult to restrain their anger, and they almost threw their teacups. Stop joking, you bastard! Stop wasting time. Hurry up and fight. Stop talking nonsense. Are you still a man? Katori-san, you can do it. Kill him. But unlike the angry audience, Ichiro Katori froze for a moment, and then his expression turned ugly, because Huaishir was right. This was indeed his own flaw. Huaishir was originally 175 centimeters tall. After a year of growth and development as a sublimator, his final height had stabilized at 186 centimeters. If he wore shoes, he could reach 188 centimeters. Among the sublimators, he wasn't particularly tall, but he wasn't particularly short either. Rather, he was in the middle range. His weight was also relatively light. At this height and weight, he was most suited to bring out the agility and explosive strength of a Yin spirit. On the other hand, Ichiro Katori was 183 centimeters tall. The difference was no more than 5 centimeters, but height was only the most superficial of differences. In reality, the fatal flaw was the length of his arms. Huaishir's arms were 3 centimeters longer than his, an inch longer, an inch stronger. Now, amidst the noisy scolding of the audience, Huaishir slowly took off her suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of her shirt, revealing her forearms. His legs parted slightly as he stood firmly on the ground. Then he raised his hands and gripped the hilt of his sword, raising it high. In the way of the sword, this was an undeniable with the advantage of
height,
structure,
arm span,
the tang
and
bamboo
sword
stance.
grip. His
His
attack range was 10 centimeters longer than Ichiro
the slashing
Katori's.
motion was
How is
completely
it?
out of shape.
Ichiro Katori
It wasn't up to standard
Huaishir
at all.
smiled,
But no
faintly.
matter who it was,
How does it
they
feel
couldn't
to be
deny
caught in a trap
that
of your own
Huaishir's
making?
advantage in height
A
and
contest
arm
of
length
swordsmanship
had been fully
without
utilized in this
stigmata
strange
and
posture.
origin
substances. Like hell, the following duel had nothing to do with swordsmanship. If his opponent wanted to use his rich experience to remain undefeated, then what Huaishir needed to do was to forcefully drag his opponent out of the realm of swordsmanship and then use his rich experience to defeat him. When Ichiro Katori had abandoned miracles in order to eliminate variables, the outcome of the duel had been dominated by the cold laws of physics. Now that both sides' reflexes had reached the peak of their limits and were on the same level, the changes in their techniques were meaningless. All that was left was a simple calculation problem. Huaishir's height was 188 centimeters, his arm span was 193 centimeters, and the sword in his hand was 75 centimeters long. His reflexes were negligible, but his maximum initial speed. After a series of calculations, when Ichiro Katori stepped into the 10-centimeter gap between them, how would he avoid defeat? It was like Xiao Ming sitting in front of a swimming pool, looking at the pool in front of him. One end of the pool was letting in water, while the other end was letting in water. If you're so kind, can you help him? Come on, Ichiro Katori. Huaishir stared at his opponent and asked curiously, "Why aren't you moving?" It doesn't matter if you're using Katori Shinto, Yagyu Shinyan Ryu, Saber Flow, Sunset Flow, or Mudslide Flow. Bring it on. The current him, after discarding all irrelevant thoughts, had become a pure machine, waiting for his opponent to enter his attack range. Victory or defeat would be decided within these 10 centimeters. Amidst the deathly silence, he smiled slightly and softly announced, "By the way, my next target is also your face." "You bastard!" Ichiro Katori's face was ashen. He was furious. He raised the sword in his hand and took a step forward. However, Huaishir didn't move. His face was expressionless. He was like a statue made of clay. There was no reaction at all. In fact, his eyes weren't even focused on Ichiro Katori's body. Instead, they were focused on some empty space. After discarding all distracting thoughts, all that was left was a pure reflex. Chapter 727. For a long time, Kurori Ichiro remained motionless. Was there a need to see through it? There was no need at all. Kurori Ichiro's posture and muscles were completely undisguised. What he was brewing was a slash that was as sharp as a flash of lightning. Kurori Ichiro's pure speed was already accumulating in this rigid and inflexible posture, surpassing Kurori Ichiro. As long as Kurori Ichiro dared to step within 10 centimeters of Kurori Ichiro's attack range, what awaited him would be a thunderous strike. But the upper part of the structure had its flaws. In the silence, Kurori Ichiro's mind raced. If Kurori Ichiro wanted to use distance to win, then he could also use distance to his advantage. Indeed, there was a 10-centimeter gap between their attack range, but Kurori Ichiro's sword still needed time to land on his body. If he rashly used the middle part of the attack range, he would be in danger. Thus, while he was deep in thought, his body had already reacted naturally. Kurori Ichiro lowered his body, bent his waist, bent his legs, and extended the sword in his hand forward, pointing it at Huaishir's lower body. It was simple geometry. Huaishir also changed his posture. Middle part, sudden thrust structure, throat. Kurori Ichiro pointed his sword straight at Kurori Ichiro's vital point and said where he was going to attack next. Sudden thrust minimized the distance of the slash and maintained the advantage of the attack range. Kurori Ichiro placed all his strength in this attack. Before Kurori Ichiro's attack reached him, Kurori Ichiro's throat would be pierced. It was at that moment that Kurori Ichiro smiled and sheathed his sword. His movements were as smooth as flowing water, and his movements were natural and harmonious. He had practiced this thousands of times, and it had already been engraved in his bones. All his reactions and the use of his muscles had entered the process that had been repeated for an unknown amount of time. This was the sword-drawing technique. The moment Kurori Ichiro reacted, he had already shot towards Huaishir, ground shrinking. It was still a kendo technique that was so pure that there was no next time. Kurori Ichiro relied on his toes to push his body forward, achieving the terrifying effect of moving forward without any warning. After accelerating in the blink of an eye, Kurori Ichiro's feet stepped on the ground, and his speed increased explosively for the second time. Now, immediately at that moment, Kurori Ichiro's knees and muscles pushed him forward, as if he was flying
Ichiro's
close to the ground. His speed
Ichiro's
increased for the third time.
Ichiro.
In that instant, Ichiro had already entered Huaishi's 10-centimeter range. But this change was too fast.
Ichiro, as his arm strength and skills,
which he had trained for many
was
years,
already too late.
were enough to cut a person in half in an instant. It didn't matter even if Huaishir was able to block this attack.
Relied on his
After
own
closing the
swordsmanship
distance,
to break free from
it was
the measurement
already
of numbers
his home ground
and surpass physics.
His opponent had
The situation
already
had
entered the trap,
reversed.
and he had 100,000 ways to react to it. He could kill Huaishir. He grinned and growled, roar. At the same time, he was greeted by shouts of disbelief. Noodles! The instantaneous changes and intertwining caused everyone's eyes to blur, making it difficult for them to see the changes clearly. A resounding voice was heard. That was the cry of steel. The sound of blades rubbing against each other was so resounding. Its sharp voice spread out and was drowned out by the clamor that followed closely behind. The two of them froze in place. A sweet heat fell from the top of his head and landed on Katori's face. The color of blood spread and fell to the ground. He widened his eyes in a daze, looking at the blade that was only a sliver away from his eyes. He was so close to death that it was almost non-existent. He had lost. When he raised his head stiffly, he saw Huaishir's cut hand and the broken blade in his hand. The outcome has been decided. Huaishir smiled and announced softly, "I won." Ichiro fell into a daze. His lips quivered. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe what he had seen in that instant. Just now, the cry of steel wasn't heard once, but twice. It was just that the interval between the two sounds was so narrow that many people couldn't tell the difference between the two. And the second sound was the sound of his sword being blocked. The first sound was the wail of Huaishir's sword breaking. When Ichiro pounced past the 10-centimeter mark, Huaishir pulled back his sword to defend, as if he had already expected this. Then, right in front of Ichiro's eyes, he raised his hand and placed it on his sword. Then he broke his own sword into two, clean and efficient. His movements were so skillful that it was as if he had practiced it countless times in his mind. In an instant, the katana in his hand became two blades. By the time Ichiro reacted, the part of the blade in his hand blocked the sword in front of his sword, and the other part of the broken blade was already in front of his eyes. Victory was announced. And so, the dust settled, and the outcome was decided. In the dead silence after the clamor outside the arena, Huaishir raised his hand that was holding the sword and pushed Ichiro's sword to the side. He took a step back and let go of his hand, allowing the sword covered in his own blood to fall to the ground. The other broken blade, with a hilt, was still pressed against his face. Ichiro stared blankly at the sword in front of him. After a long time, he finally raised his head and looked at Huaishir. "You planned this from the beginning?" he asked hoarsely. "You planned to do this from the beginning? It's very shameless, isn't it? But I have no choice. I can't compare to you in swordsmanship." Huaishir shrugged and replied helplessly, "Of course, I have to be prepared." From the beginning, he hadn't dared to underestimate Ichiro. Indeed, his swordsmanship was limited by the fact that he couldn't use origin substances or stigmata. Indeed, his arms and height were longer than Ichiro's, so he had an advantage. But what was the point of that? Wasn't a technique that could allow a person to break through their limits, make up for their weaknesses, and turn the tide of battle around. If Ichiro's swordsmanship was able to close the distance between them by 10 centimeters, what would he do then? As such, it was better to beat him at his own game, provoke him, guide him, and tempt him to close the distance between them. Close the distance between them until they were within 75 centimeters, and then two blades against one blade. From the very beginning, Ichiro had already jumped into Huaishi's trap. This wasn't because he lacked experience in combat, but rather because he lacked knowledge in the uncanny way. As long as there was nothing wrong with his brain, who would have thought that his opponent would suddenly break his blade and play with him? You probably don't have many life and death battles with others, right? Huaishi lowered his head and observed Ichiro's stunned expression. He couldn't help but shake his head. Wait until you meet someone who can stuff explosives between their teeth. You won't think that breaking a blade is a big deal anymore. This was against the rules. This was against the rules. Ichiro really wanted to say this, but in the end, he closed his eyes in silence. He sighed silently. He let go of the sword in his hand. I lost. He bowed his head respectfully. Thank you for your guidance. No need to thank me, no need to thank me. Huaishi happily raised his hand and patted his shoulder. Little Ichiro, it's normal for a young person to be arrogant and complacent after achieving so much. When you go back, remember to practice more and improve every day. Don't slack off. Only then will you be able to become a pillar of the modern era. As he spoke, he raised his head and glanced at the referee. Are you mute? Say something. The referee froze for a moment. His stiff expression twitched as he finally spoke. The victor has been decided. Winner, White Paper Man. Thus, Huaishi turned his head and looked at the stiff faces outside the arena. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. Then, from the silence, a crisp applause rang out. It came from the very top. Sheng Tianmu smiled and raised his hands to clap twice. Then he turned his head to look at the faces below the arena and waited quietly until those people finally came to their senses from the old man's gaze. They raised their hands in panic and clapped with all their might, fighting to be the first. Thunderous applause emerged out of nowhere and filled the entire banquet. They cheered for the victory of the Alliance Master. It lasted for a long time. Even if their palms were red from clapping, they didn't dare to stop or slow down in the slightest, until Sheng Tianmu raised his hand with a smile and pressed it down. In an instant, the entire banquet was silent. Only a helpless voice came from the side. No matter how much you want to show off, it's still a bit too much. Father. Li Hua raised her eyes and said, White Paper Man is still bleeding. Sheng Tianmu suddenly understood. He patted his head and revealed a kind smile. Look at my impatient temper. Lord Huang Chuan, Lord Huang Chuan, can you send a doctor over to take care of it? Humph. Huang Chuan's expression was gloomy. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he lowered his head. You are the Alliance Master. Of course, you have the final say. Men, no need. Li Hua stood up and gently said, Father, you guys can chat first. Just arrange a room to rest. I will help White Paper Man take care of it. As she spoke, she pulled her hair behind her ear and revealed a beautiful smile. Once these words were spoken, the atmosphere in the entire banquet hall suddenly stagnated. A low clamor spread out. Everyone looked at Huaishi with a burning gaze, as if they wanted to burn this bastard to death here. Li Hua smiled, natural and unrestrained. Then, under the guidance of the servants, she brought Huaishi out of the banquet hall. Huaishi felt that his entire body was not good. It was not excitement, but discomfort. The sense of danger coming from Li Hua was getting stronger and stronger, making people uneasy. Along the way, Li Hua walked in front with a smile. After the servant opened the door, she turned around and instructed, I have some confidential matters to discuss with White Paper Man. You guys don't need to come close. Yes. The servant nodded frantically. After respectfully retreating a few steps, he turned around and left. In the dead silence, Li Hua watched him leave before slowly closing the door. She smiled at Huaishur, who was in the room with a cautious and confused expression. Huaishur, wanting to say something but hesitating, wanting to say something again. Full concentration, careful and vigilant. He was afraid that she would take off her hypocritical mask in this place where there was no one around. She wanted to show off her beastly desires and ruin his pure body. Then she pulled open her wide collar.
Don't be nervous.
And slowly took off her exquisite and gorgeous robe
and walked in.
Under
Huaishur's
Huaishur's
dazed
gaze.
She revealed
let me show you
her
something
body
good.
tight as she spoke.
Leather clothes
She
that
lifted
did
her
not
hair
reflect
and
any light
untied
at
her
all.
belt.
She also revealed all kinds of small and complicated intrusion devices, and the syringe gun in her hand. By the time Huaishur reacted, the syringe gun in her hand was already pressed against Huaishur's neck, and she pulled the trigger. Just like that, the drug that was enough to make hundreds of people fall into a deep sleep was injected into Huaishur's artery. Huaishur's vision turned black as he fell to the ground. Then Li Hua picked him up and threw him on the bed. Have a good sleep, Huaishur. In his daze, he seemed to hear a familiar voice calling his name. Then he saw a figure walking towards the window, pushing it open and jumping into the night. He closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Like hell. Could it be that the drug resistance that he developed from eating so many demon cooking dishes was a joke? Huaishur was still full of energy. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.